There are moments in the history of the world that feel like ruptures in time, cracks where something immense happened, yet almost nothing remains to tell the story. When we look back into humanity's deep past, we expect a neat evolutionary staircase, primitive apes gradually transforming into modern humans, slowly improving, slowly spreading, slowly learning. But reality is not so gentle. Our origins are not a steady climb. They are a storm that lasted nearly 200,000 years. Scientists call this period an evolutionary gap, a span of time so large, so empty, so baffling that even today, with supercomputers and genetic sequencing, it stands like a black wall, a void where our species should have left footprints, tools, bones, anything, but instead left silence. What if that silence is not an accident? What if the world itself erased everything from that forgotten age? Imagine the Earth 300,000 years ago. The continents were the same shapes we know today, but the climate was shifting through violent natural cycles. Glaciers advanced and retreated like armies. Supervolcanoes erupted without warning. Entire animal species vanished in what seemed like sudden global sweeps. Yet in the middle of this chaotic planet walked beings who were not quite us, but not entirely different either. Lost branches of humanity, some stronger than us, some smarter in ways we cannot measure, some so unique that science still struggles to classify them. And then something happened, something that wiped those worlds clean. When geneticists mapped the human genome, they were stunned by an unexpected discovery, a bottleneck, a collapse in human population so severe that it nearly deleted the entire lineage. A moment when the number of breeding humans plummeted to a tiny fraction of what it had been. Why? Nobody knows. What force was powerful enough to push humanity to the edge of extinction, and then, somehow, allow it to recover? As we study ancient sediments, fossils, and climate archives, we uncover hints of planet-wide disasters, massive volcanic winters, meteor impacts, ocean current shutdowns, even solar radiation spikes. But none of them fully explain the strangeness of the gap, the archaeological void where innovation should have exploded, where evolutionary divergence should have left clearer marks, where our ancestors should have written the early chapters of our story. Instead, we find broken hints, a few stone tools scattered across Africa, a fragment of a skull that refuses classification, genetic markers in our DNA that point to interbreeding with unknown hominin species we've never found fossils for. It's as if an entire epoch was scrubbed away, as if history itself pressed delete. Picture a world where different types of humans coexisted, some small, some tall, some with brain shapes we barely understand. They hunted different prey. They navigated landscapes shaped by megafauna we can only imagine. They survived temperatures that would crush modern societies. And most astonishing of all, they interacted with each other. Modern humans, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other unnamed groups existed side by side. Then suddenly, almost all of them vanished, leaving modern Homo sapiens as the last survivors. Why us? Why only us? One theory suggests that our species may have gone through a transformative leap, cognitive, genetic, or behavioral, during this blank period. A leap that allowed us to communicate, cooperate, and imagine in ways no other species could match. But if such a leap occurred, why is there no clear archaeological trail? Why do we not see the steady development of complex tools, symbolism, or rituals until long after this gap ends? Another theory, far more provocative, wonders whether humans reached a level of sophistication earlier than we admit, only to have that early progress obliterated by global catastrophe. If such proto-civilizations existed, they would have used materials that would not survive hundreds of thousands of years. Wood, leather, fabrics, shelters made from organic material, they would vanish without a trace. Even simple coastal settlements would lie deep underwater today, drowned by rising seas after the last great glacial melt. The ocean hides a past we have barely begun to explore. Yet the strangest detail of all comes from mythology. Across cultures separated by oceans and millennia, from the Sumerians to the Dogon, from the Maya to the Aboriginal Australians, there are myths of earlier ages. Ages of creation, ages of destruction, ages when the first people lived through darkness, fire, or flood. Stories of ancestors who survived cosmic events and rebuilt the world. Myth is not evidence, but myth often contains memory. Could these stories be distant echoes of a real cataclysm? A memory passed through generations so ancient that they precede our oldest archaeological sites? A memory originating from this 200,000-year void where our species nearly disappeared? Modern science tends to separate itself from ancient legend. But what if they are pieces of the same puzzle? Genetics gives us a bottleneck. Geology gives us disasters. Archaeology gives us missing chapters. Mythology gives us survivors. Put them together, and a new picture begins to emerge. A picture more complex than the simple evolutionary timeline taught in schools. A picture where humanity is older, more resilient, and more mysterious than we imagined. In this documentary, we will walk through that lost human epoch. We will travel through ancient ice ages, volcanic winters, shifting continents, and vanished human species. We will examine clues that do not fit the established timeline and explore theories that challenge our understanding of what it means to be human. This is not the story of civilization. This is the story before civilization, the story before everything we call history, the chapter that science can barely reconstruct. And yet, it may be the chapter that explains who we truly are. Because what comes next, the discoveries, the anomalies, the clues buried in our DNA, will reveal just how much of our past is missing and why that missing past matters. But what came next would change everything. Those words describe not just our narrative transition, but a turning point in the history of our species. Because when you step into the void, the vast 200,000-year expanse of missing human history, you begin to realize that the silence is not empty at all. It is filled with faint echoes, echoes buried in caves, deserts, riverbeds, and coastal shelves. Echoes so subtle that scientists ignored them for decades. Echoes so strange that even today they spark arguments in conference halls, online journals, and excavation sites around the world. To understand this lost epoch, we must first return to the landscape where humanity was forged, ancient Africa. Not the Africa we imagine today, with savannas stretched beneath a blazing sky, but a drastically shifting world, a continent pulled between wet and dry cycles, reshaped by superstorms, droughts, and rapid climate swings. Lakes grew into inland seas, then evaporated into salt flats. Forests expanded like emerald kingdoms and then collapsed into barren grasslands. It was a world that forced adaptation, invention, and resilience. And during this time, a strange pattern appears in the fossil record. Not a pattern of progression, but of interruption. Across East and South Africa, archaeologists find stone tools that leap ahead of their time, only to vanish again. Technologies appear, disappear, and reappear thousands of years later, as if invented by separate groups who never communicated. It is as if pockets of innovation existed, isolated, vulnerable, brilliant, and then were crushed by forces we still cannot fully identify. One of the most perplexing sites lies in southern Africa's interior. There, archaeologists uncovered artifacts nearly 300,000 years old that should not exist at that age. Finely crafted stone points, pigments, and evidence of complex hunting strategies. These were not crude or primitive designs. They hinted at planning, coordination, and symbolic behavior. And yet, the people who made them vanished from the fossil record without leaving descendants, settlements, or clues. Who were they? How did they learn such techniques? And why did their knowledge not spread across the continent? Some scientists suggest these groups may have been early Homo sapiens. Others argue they represent an entirely different lineage, one that looked like us, thought like us, maybe even spoke like us, but belonged to a shadow branch of humanity that died out during the mysterious bottleneck. This is where genetics begins to whisper secrets. When researchers decode the human genome, they find traces of ancient interbreeding events, not just with Neanderthals and Denisovans, but with other hominin groups. Groups that remain unidentified. We do not have their bones. We do not know their faces, but their DNA flows through us like ghosts. These ghost lineages did not exist outside Africa. They lived, evolved, and vanished inside the very cradle of our species. The fact that we carry their genetic signatures suggests something profound. We were not alone. Humanity did not arise from a single clean lineage. We are the survivors of a complex, tangled epoch where multiple human species shared the continent, competed, collaborated, and merged. And if these shadow species contributed to our genetic makeup, what else might they have passed down? Behaviors, survival strategies, cognitive abilities? The gap grows stranger, because while Africa was shifting through its climatic cycles, the rest of the world was undergoing transformations just as dramatic. Asia, for example, was home to Denisovans, a powerful, elusive hominin with a genetic legacy stretching from Siberia to Southeast Asia and deep into the Pacific. Denisovans interbred with early humans multiple times. They occupied landscapes from snowy mountains to tropical islands, and then, like the others, they disappeared in a cloud of mystery. Even more baffling is the discovery of Homo floresiensis, the so-called hobbits, living on the Indonesian island of Flores until around 60,000 years ago. They were tiny, resourceful, and possibly used fire and tools. They existed at the same time modern humans were spreading across the world. How many of these unusual species lived during the 200,000-year gap? How many interacted with us? How many stories will never be uncovered? But fossils alone do not solve the puzzle. To understand the lost epoch, we must also consider the catastrophic forces shaping the planet. This was an Earth that experienced some of the most violent natural events imaginable. The Toba supervolcano eruption, roughly 74,000 years ago, is often proposed as one such event. Though its impact is debated, some models suggest it may have plunged the planet into a volcanic winter. Temperatures dropped, ecosystems collapsed, populations of animals and humans shrank. This kind of disaster could erase entire cultures, technologies, and even species. But Toba alone cannot explain the full 200,000-year void. Instead, scientists now suspect the world endured multiple catastrophic pulses. Rapid climate changes triggered by shifts in Earth's orbit, collapses in ocean circulation, and sudden dry-wet cycles. It was not one apocalypse, but perhaps a series of them. A planet that reset itself again and again, forcing humans to adapt or die. In such a world, knowledge was fragile. A group could develop advanced tools, symbolic practices, even early rituals, and a single ecological shift could scatter them, starve them, or erase them entirely. Innovation did not spread in a straight line. It flickered in pockets of stability, then vanished with the next environmental collapse. Which brings us to one of the biggest mysteries of the gap. Why does the archaeological record show long periods where tool technology stagnates or even regresses? Why do we see humans reverting to simpler tools after producing more complex ones? One unsettling explanation is that these were not natural regressions. They were survival regressions. In times of extreme crisis, simplicity becomes a necessity. Advanced techniques are abandoned for speed. Symbolism and art are forsaken for survival. Knowledge collapses because the world collapses. And yet, through all this destruction, modern humans eventually emerged as the dominant lineage. We survived when others faded. But survival is not the whole story. Something else happened. Something that allowed us to outlast every competitor. Was it a genetic shift, a neurological mutation, a cultural revolution, or something more mysterious? Something that left no trace in bones or sediments? To answer this, we must look at the clues left behind in stories older than writing. Myths of first ages, golden epochs, and cosmic catastrophes. Tales of worlds swallowed by fire or drowned by rising waters. These myths often describe multiple cycles, worlds before this world, humanity before this humanity. Are they fiction or memories from the lost epoch? As we step deeper into this silent age, we begin to see that the gap is not an absence, but a distortion, a region of time where evidence is sparse, scattered, or erased. It is a chapter written in dust and DNA rather than stone inscriptions. It challenges the very foundations of what we believe about human origins. And now, with new discoveries every year, the picture is changing faster than ever. Because the next clue, found in a remote cave, sealed for tens of thousands of years, will force us to rethink everything. But what came next would change everything again. Those words echo perfectly into the next discovery, a discovery that scientists first dismissed as an anomaly, then argued over for years, and finally accepted as one of the most important clues to the missing epoch. It begins in a cave, not a grand chamber filled with paintings like Lascaux or Altamira, but a dark, narrow passage system tucked deep within a rugged landscape, a place that would have been dangerous, uncomfortable, and nearly inaccessible to early humans. And yet, someone went inside. Not once, but many times. And they left behind something that should not exist at the time it was created. This cave is known today as Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. On the surface, it looks like an ordinary shelter carved into sandstone cliffs. But inside, archaeologists found ashes, controlled fire, dating back nearly 1,000,000 years. That discovery alone shook the scientific world. But deeper layers of sediment revealed something even more astonishing: stone tools and evidence of habitation stretching across hundreds of thousands of years. Wonderwork is a time capsule, holding continuous human presence for longer than almost any other site on Earth. But this is not the cave that should not exist. That title belongs to another site, a chamber that was sealed for tens of thousands of years, locked behind a collapse that preserved every artifact inside like a frozen moment in time. When researchers finally reached it, they expected simple stone tools and animal bones. What they found instead was a collection of symbols, geometric carvings, patterns, and markings, dating back at least 100,000 years. Symbols so deliberate, so intentional, that they challenge the timeline of human cognition. Prior to this discovery, most scientists believed symbolic thinking, the ability to represent ideas through shapes and images, emerged around 50,000 to 60,000 years ago. But these carvings were nearly twice that age. The cave contained fragments of ochre, etched with cross-hatched patterns, deliberate lines, and repeated motifs. These were not random scratches. They were organized, structured. They suggested planning. They suggested meaning. They suggested a mind far more advanced than the timeline allowed. This forced a question no one in mainstream anthropology wanted to ask. If humans were capable of symbolic thought 100,000 years ago, why did it take another 40,000 to 50,000 years for complex art, rituals, and technologies to explode across the world? What held us back? Was it climate, competition, something else entirely? These questions rattled foundations. They still do, but symbolic carvings were only the beginning. Across Africa, archaeologists uncovered additional hints of behavior far older than expected. Beads made from marine shells found miles inland, pigment processing kits, tools designed for specialized tasks, even early forms of glue created from plant resins used to attach stone points to wooden shafts. These innovations appear in pulses, sudden bursts of creativity that disappear and then reappear thousands of years later. The pattern is unmistakable. Innovation was not linear. It was episodic. Something was disrupting human progress again and again. To understand why, we must step back and examine the landscape of the lost epoch, not as a single event, but as a long, grinding struggle against nature itself. During the 200,000-year gap, Earth was not stable. Climate swings occurred every few thousand years. Rain belts shifted. deserts expanded, coastlines changed, and animal populations fluctuated wildly. The humans who lived through this era were constantly forced to move, adapt, and rebuild. Imagine a small group of early humans developing a breakthrough, a new tool, a symbolic ritual, a system of cooperation. For a moment, their world becomes brighter, richer, more connected. Then a drought hits, or a volcanic eruption, or a sudden temperature drop. The group is scattered or dies out. Their innovation vanishes with them, leaving no descendants to carry it forward. This is the tragedy of the lost epoch. Progress was real. Humanity was learning, but the world kept wiping the slate clean. Yet even with all this instability, one aspect of the archaeological record stands out: the presence of multiple human species living side by side. This is not speculation, it is genetic fact. Our DNA contains fragments of at least 3 extinct hominin lineages. Some left clear fossil trails, others left none. Among the most enigmatic were the Denisovans, identified from a single cave in Siberia. Their DNA is a ghostly reminder of a species that may have been widespread, adaptable, and far more diverse than we realize. But the Denisovans were not the only ones. Genetic sequencing points to at least one other mysterious group, sometimes called hominin X, whose traces appear in West African populations. These unknown ancestors diverged hundreds of thousands of years ago, lived alongside early Homo sapiens, and then vanished. But what happened to them? Why did only one lineage survive? Some researchers suggest that early Homo sapiens developed unique social structures that allowed them to outcompete their relatives. Others argue that we may have had superior adaptability or broader diets. But these advantages seem insufficient to explain the complete disappearance of so many species across multiple continents. This brings us back to the cave that should not exist, because another discovery found deeper within similar sealed chambers suggests the possibility of something far more dramatic. In one such chamber, archaeologists found evidence of controlled fire being used repeatedly within deep cave systems. Fire carried deliberately into spaces with no natural light. Fire tended in chambers where oxygen was scarce. Why would early humans enter such places risking suffocation and darkness? Some speculate that these journeys may have been ritualistic, a sign that symbolic behavior, and perhaps early spiritual belief, was far older and more complex than we imagine. Others suggest it could be an early form of social bonding, a shared experience that strengthened group identity. But there is also a more controversial interpretation, whispered in the edges of research papers but rarely stated outright. Perhaps humans were seeking shelter from something outside, something dangerous, something that forced them underground. Was it extreme climate, predatory animals, volcanic ash, solar storms, or something else entirely? Something that left no physical signature but cast a long shadow over the lives of early humans? We do not know. But the pattern of cave use during the lost epoch is unusual enough to raise eyebrows. And then we come to the most startling detail. Some cave markings appear to have been made not with simple stone tools, but with tools designed for precision, tools that imply fine motor control and planning. If this is true, then the capabilities of ancient humans, or perhaps their contemporaries, were greater than expected. What else could they do? What else have we overlooked? The more we learn, the more the official timeline seems too neat, too simple, too linear. The evidence tells a different story, a story of advances and collapses, of lost cultures and forgotten species, of knowledge gained and erased many times over. The cave that should not exist stands as a monument to this complexity, a whisper from a world where human intelligence was already glowing, long before it was supposed to ignite. And as we step deeper into this lost epoch, we will encounter even more impossible discoveries, ones that stretch the limits of our understanding and challenge the very foundation of human origins. Because what came next would challenge the timeline itself. Those words are more than a narrative bridge. They foreshadow a truth that scientists have quietly wrestled with for decades. The prehistoric timeline does not behave the way a timeline should. It bends, it jumps, it contradicts itself. Events appear out of order. Innovations show up too early, vanish, then return later as if rediscovered rather than inherited. Extinct human species appear far from where they should be. Fossils emerge that do not match any known branch. And in the shadows of all these anomalies lies the 200,000-year gap, the void where the rules break down completely. To understand the depth of this problem, we must examine the fossil record piece by piece, not as a neat progression from primitive to modern, but as a shattered mosaic scattered across time. Because when we place the pieces together honestly, not by forcing them into the accepted model, the picture that forms is far stranger than anything taught in classrooms. One of the most disruptive discoveries came from Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, a set of skulls and tools dated to around 315,000 years ago. Before this discovery, the origin of Homo sapiens was commonly placed around 200,000 years ago in East Africa. But Jebel Irhoud pushed our species' timeline back by over 100,000 years and placed it on the opposite side of the continent. These early humans had faces strikingly similar to ours, yet their brains were elongated, shaped differently from modern human brains. They were us, but not fully us. They hunted, gathered, used fire, shaped tools, but then the trail goes cold. The Jebel Irhoud people leave no clear descendants. They vanish into the fog of the lost epoch. Why? What happened to them? At the same time, another discovery surfaced in Israel. Fossils of Homo sapiens around 200,000 years old, older than expected for humans outside Africa. This contradicted the long-standing model which claimed that humans left Africa only 60,000, 70,000 years ago. Yet here were our ancestors, wandering through the Levant almost 130,000 years earlier than predicted. The timeline bent again. Then came the discovery in Greece, a partial human skull, possibly Homo sapiens, dated to over 210,000 years ago. If confirmed, it means modern humans reached Europe far earlier than believed, only to disappear again before later waves arrived around 45,000 years ago. This raises a haunting possibility. Maybe early humans explored the world in multiple waves, long before the final migration that stuck. Maybe entire populations spread into Europe or Asia, only to be wiped out by climate disasters, rival species, or simple chance. If true, then most of humanity's early attempts at exploration ended in extinction, not failure, extinction. The timeline bends further. On the other side of the world, stone tools found in northern Australia may date as far back as 65,000 years, challenging old models of when humans reached the continent. But some researchers quietly suggest older dates, far older, based on erosion patterns and sediment analysis. If humans or human-like species reached Australia earlier than thought, we are faced with another puzzle. Who were they, and how did they get there? The sea crossings required would have been formidable even for later Homo sapiens. But perhaps the most troubling findings of all come from places where the evidence should not exist at all. In Brazil, a site called Pedra Furada contains charcoal and stone flakes that might date back 30,000, 40,000, even 50,000 years, long before humans were supposed to have reached the Americas. Most scientists dismissed the early dates for decades, but newer genetic evidence, combined with the discovery of ancient skulls in Brazil with non-native features, makes the question unavoidable. Were there earlier human groups in the Americas that vanished without a trace? If so, they belong to the same story, the story of lineages that rose during the lost epoch and died before history began. The pattern emerges again and again, evidence of early human presence, followed by disappearance, followed by later reappearance of unrelated groups. This is not a timeline of progress. It is a timeline of cycles. But perhaps the most explosive challenge to the timeline comes from a discovery in a Siberian cave, a single fragment of bone. When scientists sequenced the DNA of this bone, they were stunned. It belonged to a girl with a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. a hybrid, a direct first-generation mixing of two species that were thought to be evolutionarily distant. That alone rewrote textbooks. But when deeper analysis was performed, it revealed even more. Denisovans themselves carried genes from an even older lineage, a species that split from the human family tree over 1 million years ago. This means that during the lost epoch, humanity was not one species, but many, a complex web of interwoven lineages, sharing continents, caves, resources, and perhaps even cultures. When we look at this tangled web, the linear timeline collapses entirely. Why were multiple species of humans alive at the same time? Why did they interbreed? Why did some thrive while others vanished? And most importantly, why does the archaeological record show sudden leaps in intelligence and behavior that appear almost simultaneously across different regions? Some scientists propose that environmental stress forced innovation. Others argue for genetic exchanges between species. Still others believe the timeline is missing massive amounts of evidence. Entire regions of the world left unexplored, entire coastlines lost beneath ocean water. But there is a more uncomfortable possibility. Something major happened during the lost epoch. Something transformative. Something that affected not just one lineage, but all of them. It might have been climate. It might have been natural disasters. It might have been competition. Or it might have been something we have not yet considered. An event so significant that it left no physical evidence, yet changed everything. To grasp this possibility, we must look at the few surviving genetic markers that hint at ancient population crashes. Bottlenecks, drops so severe that humanity nearly vanished multiple times. These bottlenecks do not align neatly with known disasters. They suggest repeating cycles of decline, recovery, and reinvention, cycles that mirror the archaeological bursts of innovation and the gaps of silence. A timeline shaped not by steady evolution, but by resets. Resets that erased species. Resets that erased cultures. Resets that erased knowledge. This is the true nature of the 200,000-year gap. It is not an empty space. It is a battlefield where the future of humanity was fought again and again. And the deeper we go into this forgotten epoch, the more we see a disturbing pattern. Intelligence did not emerge once. It emerged multiple times, in different regions, in different species, only to be wiped away. But the most bewildering evidence, the most impossible of all, is still ahead. A discovery that does not just challenge the timeline, but tears it open. Because what comes next bends human history into a shape we are not prepared to accept. Those words loom over the next chapter of our investigation. A chapter filled with objects that defy the accepted timeline. Objects that appear in layers of Earth where they simply should not exist. Objects that were dismissed for decades as misdated, mislabeled, or misunderstood. And yet, as new technologies refine dating methods, and as researchers re-examine old collections, the truth becomes harder to ignore. The lost epoch contains artifacts that belong to no known culture, no accepted species, and no traditional model of human evolution. They are the tools that should not exist. It begins modestly enough with the discovery of stone tools far older than anyone expected. Tools found in Kenya, Ethiopia, and Tanzania, shaped edges, deliberate flaking, carefully crafted surfaces, all dated to more than 300,000 years ago. These tools appeared before Homo sapiens was officially supposed to exist, and yet they match the sophistication of later human technologies. How could this be? Did some earlier hominin develop these techniques independently, or were early Homo sapiens active much earlier than we assumed? But even these discoveries pale in comparison to what came next. In the Kalahari Basin, archaeologists recently uncovered what appears to be a fully developed toolkit: scrapers, blades, pigments, and possibly even symbolic engravings, all dated to at least 100,000 years before the earliest known complex cultures. These artifacts show planning. They show specialization. They show something that should not appear until tens of thousands of years later. But the most troubling part? The people who made them vanished. Their innovations vanished with them. no descendants, no cultural continuity, just a burst of brilliance followed by silence. This strange pattern repeats across Africa and beyond. In South Asia, tools found in the Middle Sun River Valley display techniques similar to later Homo sapiens industries, but they are nearly 200,000 years older. In India, stone blades appear 100,000 years too early. Even more confusing are the tools discovered at Atirampakam, finely crafted stone points dated to over 385,000 years ago. That date alone would require completely rewriting human migration timelines. Most researchers hesitate to even discuss it publicly, but the evidence does not care about our reluctance. It keeps emerging. And then there are the oldest of all, the Lomekwi tools of Kenya, dated to 3.3 million years ago. These simple yet deliberate stone tools are far older than Homo sapiens, older even than Homo erectus. They predate the genus Homo entirely. Who made them? How? And why do the techniques appear more advanced than expected for such ancient hominins? These discoveries reveal a truth few scientists want to confront. Tool-making, intelligence, and innovation did not emerge once in a tidy progression. They emerged many times in different species, in different regions, across vast stretches of prehistory. Intelligence was not a miracle exclusive to modern humans. It was a spark that flickered across the hominin world, sometimes bright, sometimes dim, often extinguished, but never fully gone. But what about objects that go even further? Objects that challenge not just the human timeline, but the boundaries of what ancient species were capable of. During reanalysis of old museum collections, researchers found bone tools with precise cuts, tools requiring skill and anatomical knowledge, dating back over 200,000 years. In some cases, these tools appear alongside engravings or markings that may represent early symbolic behavior. These carvings resemble geometric forms repeated in different regions, separated by thousands of miles. How could such patterns emerge in groups supposedly isolated from each other? Coincidence? Parallel evolution? Or shared memory from a time deeper than we realize? Another puzzle lies in the mysterious spheroids, round stone spheres found across Africa, Europe, and the Middle East. Some date back as far as 1.8 million years. They are perfectly shaped, weighted, polished through deliberate flaking. Their purpose remains unknown. Were they tools, weapons, ritual objects, counting stones, early forms of memory devices? Whatever they were, they required months of skilled craftsmanship. Yet no known hominin of that era should have possessed the cognitive abilities required to make them. And then there are the polished stone axes found in Australia, objects that appear 30,000 years earlier than anything similar in Africa or Europe. Tools so advanced that they should belong to much later periods, yet they appear at the dawn of human arrival on the continent. How did such technology arrive fully formed? Was it invented independently, or did it descend from an earlier innovation lost elsewhere? The anomalies grow stranger still when we examine ancient footprints. In Tanzania at Laetoli, footprints dated to over 3.6 million years ago walk across volcanic ash in perfect alignment, a stride, gait, and foot structure eerily similar to modern humans. Too similar. Debates rage over whether these were early hominins or an unknown species. But the fact remains, something with human-like feet walked across Africa millions of years before Homo sapiens. In Crete, possible human-like footprints are dated to 7 million years, older than the earliest African fossils of the human lineage. If these footprints belong to hominins or proto-humans, then the entire out-of-Africa model would need reconsideration. Most scientists reject the footprints outright, but the evidence is there, embedded in rock. And this is only the beginning. Across the world, scattered like crumbs leading into the darkness of the lost epoch, we find artifacts, carvings, bones, and structures that refuse to fit. They are the fragments of stories erased by time, disasters, and extinction events. They suggest that early humans, or human-like species, were far more capable, widespread and interconnected than we assume. But there is a deeper implication, one that few dare to voice. If tools appear where they should not, if innovation emerges too early, if symbols appear long before the creative explosion, if unknown species contributed to our DNA, if migrations happened 100,000 years before the accepted dates, then what does that mean for the lost epoch? It means the official story is incomplete. It means the gap is not just a gap in fossils, it is a gap in memory, a missing chapter where multiple human species, each capable in their own way, lived through cycles of catastrophe that wiped their achievements from the earth. A chapter where innovation was not linear but cyclical. A chapter where intelligence flickered in the dark, long before it took root in us. And as we follow the trail deeper into this forgotten era, we encounter the greatest question of all. If intelligence rose and fell many times, what was the final catalyst for the rise of our species? What changed? What survived? And what was lost? Because what comes next leads us into the heart of the mystery, the moment when humanity nearly vanished. Those words open the door to one of the darkest chapters in our deep past, a chapter written in ash, ice, and extinction, a chapter carved not by human hands but by the forces of nature itself, forces so powerful that they reshaped the Earth's climate, wiped out entire species, and nearly erased every branch of the human family tree. This is the moment when the lost epoch reveals its true nature. Not a simple absence, but a wound inflicted by a catastrophe so immense that it fractured our evolutionary history. This is the winter that almost erased us. To understand this event, we must travel back roughly 70,000 to 80,000 years, but the story begins long before that. Throughout the 200,000-year gap, humanity endured wave after wave of climatic upheaval. Ice ages advanced like slow-moving titans. Droughts crushed entire ecosystems. Volcanic eruptions choked the sky. The planet was unstable, unpredictable, ruthless. But one event stands above the rest. The Toba super-eruption. Located on the island of Sumatra, the Toba volcano unleashed one of the most violent eruptions in the last 2 million years. It expelled more than 2,000 times the material of a modern eruption. Ash blanketed continents. Sunlight dimmed, temperatures plummeted, and the world descended into what some researchers call a volcanic winter. But the exact impact of Toba is still debated. Some scientists argue it caused a global collapse in ecosystems and human populations. Others believe its effects were severe but not apocalyptic. Yet when we look at genetic evidence, the bottlenecks, the sudden drop in population, the near extinction of early human groups, the pattern points to something catastrophic. At some point in the lost epoch, the number of breeding humans may have dropped to as few as a couple thousand, maybe less. That is not a decline. That is a razor's edge. That is the difference between survival and genetic extinction. But was Toba the trigger? Or was it merely one disaster among many? To answer that, we must examine what else the planet was doing around that time. Climate records preserved in ice cores and marine sediments reveal a world already teetering on the brink. The Earth's orbit was shifting, altering the distribution of sunlight across hemispheres. Glaciers were expanding, sea levels were dropping, rainfall patterns were collapsing, animals were migrating or dying out. Human groups were already scattered, isolated and struggling to adapt. When the volcanic winter hit, it struck a species already under pressure. Imagine tens of thousands of square miles of forest dying in weeks. Imagine rivers freezing. Imagine grasslands retreating as permafrost spreads. Imagine food sources collapsing. Imagine small bands of early humans forced into desperate migrations, crossing frozen landscapes or retreating into caves for shelter. Entire lineages could have vanished in a single winter. Cultures that once thrived might have disappeared without leaving a single artifact behind. This is not speculation. This is what genetic evidence suggests. The bottleneck left scars in our DNA. scars that show how close humanity came to vanishing. The collapse was not uniform either. Populations in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia may have been affected differently. Some groups shrank. Others perhaps merged with neighbors. Still others may have disappeared entirely. And mixed into this chaos were other human species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and several unidentified lineages. What happened to them? Some scientists believe that the catastrophes of this era pushed these species to the brink, just as they did to us. Others argue that Neanderthals and Denisovans may have survived better than Homo sapiens in some regions, only to be wiped out later by different events or by competition with us. But there is another possibility, one rarely discussed openly. Perhaps some lineages perished not because they were weaker, but because they were concentrated in regions hardest hit by environmental collapse. If an advanced hominin group lived in a region struck directly by ashfall, their world could have been erased in a single instant. Their tools, their shelters, their traditions, all gone, buried beneath meters of volcanic debris. Ash is unforgiving. It destroys and preserves at the same time. But after tens of thousands of years, erosion and weathering erase even ash, and so entire worlds vanish. But Toba is only one catastrophe. Evidence suggests that before and after the eruption, the Earth experienced rapid climate swings known as Dansgaard-Oeschger events. These were sudden bursts of warming, sometimes rising 15 degrees Fahrenheit within decades, followed by equally sudden cooling phases. To humans living during the lost epoch, these events would have been apocalyptic. A sudden warming could lead to droughts and fires. A sudden cooling could lead to famine and migration. These climate swings happened again and again, carving up the timeline into cycles of survival and collapse. During one such collapse, early human culture seems to disappear entirely from parts of Africa. In others, it changes so dramatically that archaeologists cannot determine whether it represents new innovations or desperate attempts to adapt. The record becomes fragmented, patchy, distorted, a perfect setting for the 200,000-year gap. And then, at some point, another disaster struck. Some researchers point to evidence of a solar proton event, an ancient burst of solar radiation that may have damaged DNA, increased cancer rates, and affected global climate. Others suggest asteroid impacts, shifting ocean currents, or even continent-wide fires sparked by lightning storms. Each disaster leaves only faint geological fingerprints, but enough of those fingerprints exist to show a pattern. The lost epoch was a time of near-constant instability. The world itself was the predator, and humans were its prey. Through all of this, one question rises above the rest. Why did our species survive when so many others vanished? Why did Homo sapiens, fragile yet adaptable, endure wave after wave of catastrophes, while Denisovans, Neanderthals, and others faded into extinction? Some say it was luck. Others say it was social structure. Others point to neurological advantages, better communication, more flexible intelligence. But there is a deeper possibility that emerges when we examine the archaeological and genetic patterns. Perhaps our ancestors survived because they were forged by catastrophe, because their identity, their cognition, their cooperation, their resilience emerged not during times of abundance, but during times of crisis. Maybe we became human because the world nearly destroyed us. Every disaster sharpened our minds. Every collapse refined our instincts. Every near extinction forced innovation. And so the survivors of the bottleneck, the few thousand who endured the winter that almost erased us, carried within them a new set of traits. Traits that allowed them to rebuild, repopulate, and eventually dominate a world left scarred by fire, ash, and ice. But survival is not victory. Survival comes with a cost. And after the winter ended, the world our ancestors inherited was profoundly different. The land was reshaped, the climate was unpredictable, and the other human species that once shared the planet were in decline. The winter had changed everything, and what came next would change our species forever, because it was in the aftermath of this catastrophe that something new began to emerge, a spark. a shift, a turning point, something that would set Homo sapiens on a path no other species could follow. Something that would set Homo sapiens on a path no other species could follow. Those words lead us into the dawn that rose after the long winter, a dawn that brought with it a spark, a shift, an awakening that scientists still cannot fully explain. This spark changed everything: how we thought, how we communicated, how we imagined, and how we survived. It was not merely a change in tools or techniques. It was a transformation in the mind, a transformation that appeared suddenly, spreading across continents like a quiet revolution. And yet, the timing of this shift is one of the greatest paradoxes of human history, because the spark should not have appeared when it did. To understand why, we must look at the archaeological record immediately following the genetic bottleneck, the period when humanity's population may have been reduced to a mere few thousand individuals scattered across Africa. These survivors were traumatized by disaster, living in a world scarred by volcanic winters, droughts, and collapsing ecosystems. They were not numerous, not powerful, not advanced. By all logic, this should have been a time of regression, a time of survival above all else. Yet, inexplicably, something else happens. In the ashes of catastrophe, human creativity ignites. Within a few thousand years, an evolutionary blink, we begin to see the first signs of what scientists call behavioral modernity. These signs appear in South Africa, East Africa, and later across the Middle East. We find the earliest known jewelry, beads made from perforated shells, worn on strings. We find ochre pigments ground into powders and mixed with binders to create paint. We find tools designed not simply for cutting or scraping, but for crafting, shaping, decorating. Symbolism, identity, art. These are not survival behaviors. These are expressions of something internal, something emotional, cognitive, even spiritual, something new. But what caused this mental shift? Why did it appear so suddenly? And why did it emerge among a population that had barely survived extinction? One popular explanation is that the human brain crossed a biological threshold. Perhaps a genetic mutation enabled more complex language or symbolic reasoning. Perhaps neural networks reorganized under the stress of disaster. But if a mutation caused this revolution, why did it take hundreds of thousands of years to appear? Why not earlier? And why did it emerge simultaneously in multiple regions? Another theory suggests that the survivors of the bottleneck developed new levels of social cooperation driven by desperation. Only tightly bonded groups could endure harsh climates. Only groups with communication, planning, and shared identity could migrate, adapt, and thrive. Under this model, symbolic behavior, beads, pigments, engravings, emerges as a way to enhance group cohesion. But even this explanation does not fully account for the speed and scale of the transformation, because the spark did not stop at symbolism. Soon after these artifacts appear, we find evidence of entirely new forms of thinking. Humans begin to use projectiles, composite tools, adhesives, and heat treatment, techniques requiring multi-stage planning and precise control over temperature and materials. This is not instinct. This is engineering. Then the most astonishing development appears: long-distance trade. At sites dating back tens of thousands of years earlier than expected, archaeologists uncover obsidian, ochre, and shell materials transported over dozens of miles. This implies networks, roads of memory, connecting distant groups. Information was shared. Ideas were exchanged. Humans were no longer isolated pockets. They were becoming a web. But here lies the paradox. The spark appears too early. According to traditional models, this cognitive revolution should coincide with the major expansion of humans around the world roughly 50,000 to 60,000 years ago. Instead, the evidence shows humans behaving like modern humans long before that. Tens of thousands of years before the so-called creative explosion, behaviorally modern Homo sapiens existed while Neanderthals still thrived. They existed while Denisovans roamed Asia. They existed while unknown hominin groups walked Africa. Yet these modern humans remained small in number, vulnerable, fragmented. So why didn't this spark trigger a rapid rise of civilization? Why didn't complex societies emerge? Why didn't art flourish? Why didn't we see permanent structures, agriculture, or organized religion? Why did humanity possess the spark and then wait tens of thousands of years to ignite the fire of civilization? One answer is hidden in the climate. The world remained unstable. Rain belts shifted. Ice sheets advanced and retreated. Sea levels rose and fell dramatically. For tens of thousands of years after the bottleneck, humanity continued to face unpredictable cycles of abundance and famine. These cycles prevented permanent settlements, limited population growth, and disrupted cultural continuity. Innovation would rise in one region, only to be erased by drought or migration. Knowledge flickered like a candle in the wind. Another answer lies in competition. Humans were not alone. Neanderthals dominated Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans controlled parts of the East. Other unnamed species lurked in Africa. These species were not inferior brutes. Far from it. Neanderthals possessed brains slightly larger than ours. They crafted tools with remarkable precision. They hunted large game with sophisticated tactics. Denisovans may have possessed technologies we have yet to uncover. In such a world, competition for territory, resources, and shelter created constant conflict. Early Homo sapiens could not flourish freely. But then we come to the third, most unsettling possibility. The spark was not entirely biological. It may have been cultural, a legacy inherited from earlier, now extinct hominin groups. What if symbolic thinking, early art, pigments, tool-making innovations, and even early rituals were not invented solely by Homo sapiens, but borrowed, inherited, absorbed through contact and interbreeding with other species? If so, then the spark is not simply a mutation or a random leap. It is the echo of a deeper, older fire, a flame kindled by species that vanished long before our rise. This possibility ties the spark directly into the lost epoch. If multiple species of humans existed, each with their own forms of intelligence, then the collapse of the human family tree during the bottleneck would have concentrated the remnants of those lineages into us, their genes, their behaviors, their inventions, their instincts. We would be the final mosaic of a world that existed before the winter, a world almost completely erased. And yet the strangeness does not end with the spark, because after tens of thousands of years of slow progress, something happens that sends humanity on a trajectory unlike anything that came before. A migration, a movement, a departure from Africa that would reshape the entire planet. But this migration did not happen the way we were taught. It was not a single wave. It was not smooth. It was not linear. And it was not peaceful. It was a struggle for survival, identity, and dominance, a struggle written into the genetic and archaeological record. And what came next would mark the true end of the lost epoch. Those words lead us into the great movement, the migration that carried our species across deserts, mountains, rivers, ice fields, forests, and oceans. A migration that reshaped continents and erased species. A migration that began not as an adventure or an exploration, but as a survival strategy forged in the aftermath of catastrophe. Today, this journey is often simplified into tidy arrows on a map. Humans leave Africa around 60,000 years ago, spread into Europe and Asia, then into Australia, and eventually into the Americas. But the real story is nothing like the one taught in classrooms. The truth is messy, chaotic, violent, uncertain, full of false starts and failed attempts. The migration of Homo sapiens was not a single exodus. It was a series of waves, pulses, retreats, collapses, and resurgences that unfolded across tens of thousands of years. To understand this movement is to understand the end of the lost epoch. It begins long before the 60,000-year date commonly cited. Evidence from Israel, Greece, and Arabia shows that humans had already left Africa over 100,000 years ago. These early pioneers lived in small pockets throughout the Middle East, adapting to shifting climates and entering regions where Neanderthals Neanderthals had long held dominance. For a time, these groups flourished, but then the climate shifted again. Deserts expanded, and these early migrations collapsed. Their descendants either retreated back into Africa or were absorbed into neighboring hominin populations. These were the first waves, long forgotten, erased by drought and displacement. But the second wave, the one that would eventually dominate the world, emerged later. This wave began during a time of climatic improvement, when green corridors opened across northeastern Africa and the Arabian Peninsula. Rivers flowed where deserts now stand. Lakes dotted the landscape. Migration was possible, but even then it was not easy. Groups moved in small bands of 20, 50, maybe 100 individuals. They followed migrating herds along coastlines and valleys. They encountered new climates, new predators, new landscapes. But above all, they encountered new kinds of humans. For across Eurasia, other species were already waiting. Neanderthals had ruled Europe and parts of Western Asia for over 300,000 years. They were powerful, skilled, adapted to cold environments. They used fire, crafted tools, hunted mammoths and bison with cooperative strategies. They buried their dead and may have practiced rituals. They were not inferior, they were dominant. Then in the east were the Denisovans, a shadow species known mostly from fragments of bone and teeth, yet whose genetic legacy stretches from Siberia to Australia. Denisovans possessed adaptations for high-altitude living that modern humans still carry in regions like Tibet. They may have developed technologies unknown to either Neanderthals or Homo sapiens, and within Africa itself other hominin species lingered. Ghost lineages, shadow populations, groups that contributed to our DNA yet left no fossils. Into this world stepped Homo sapiens, fragile, clever, adaptable, carrying the spark of symbolic thought and the scars of catastrophe. Conflict was inevitable. The archaeological record hints at periods of violence, cut marks on bones, abrupt population replacements, layers of destruction in caves, but it also shows periods of coexistence, interbreeding, and cultural exchange. Humans swapped genes with Neanderthals multiple times. They exchanged genes with Denisovans in at least 2 separate events. Some groups may have shared hunting grounds, shelters, and even hearths. These interactions were not one event. They were centuries, perhaps millennia, of encounters. And each encounter shaped the course of humanity. Neanderthal DNA contributed to our immune systems, our skin adaptations, and aspects of our metabolism. Denisovan DNA shaped our ability to thrive at high altitudes and perhaps influenced tools or behaviors now lost to history. Even unknown hominin species left genetic traces that flow quietly in certain African populations. We are not a single lineage. We are a mosaic. But the mosaic came at a cost. As Homo sapiens expanded across Eurasia, other species dwindled. Some died in competition. Others were absorbed through interbreeding until their distinct lineages vanished. Others may have succumbed to climate changes that disproportionately affected specialized species. By 40,000 years ago, the world's diversity of human species began collapsing. Only one would remain. Yet this collapse did not happen instantly. In some regions, Neanderthals and Homo sapiens coexisted for thousands of years. In others, Denisovans may have survived into the deep forests of Southeast Asia far longer than expected. The timeline is still being rewritten as new DNA evidence emerges. But something else emerged during these migrations, something that marks the definitive end of the lost epoch. Humans began creating art, not simple engravings or pigments, true art. Paintings of animals, hand stencils on cave walls, carved figurines, musical instruments, complex burial rituals. Some of the oldest cave art in the world, found in Indonesia and Spain, may be over 45,000 years old. These images do not depict survival. They depict imagination, belief, identity, memory. The spark had become a flame. But here is the paradox. This explosion of creativity happened after humans encountered Neanderthals and Denisovans. Was it coincidence? Or did contact with other human species trigger new forms of thinking? Could competition have intensified symbolic behavior? Or could interbreeding have introduced genes that altered cognition? Whatever the cause, this burst of creativity coincides with the dramatic decline of rival species. As Homo sapiens expanded, Neanderthals retreated into shrinking pockets of Europe. Denisovans faded into the shadows of Asia. Other African lineages disappeared entirely. By 30,000 years ago, we were alone, yet our dominance was not guaranteed. The world was still dangerous. The climate remained unstable. A new ice age approached, and the lessons of the lost epoch, cycles of collapse, disappearance, extinction, still haunted humanity. But this time, something was different. Humans began building networks that stretched across continents. They developed languages, mythologies, shared identities. They remembered. They taught. They accumulated knowledge instead of losing it to disaster. Culture became cumulative. Innovation became continuous. The lost epoch had ended, but its shadows remained. Its mysteries continued to shape our DNA, our memories, and our myths. The migrations that rewrote the world also erased entire worlds that came before, worlds we will never fully recover. But we are not done, because what happened next may be the most puzzling chapter of all: the sudden rise of large, organized, sophisticated cultures at the end of the Ice Age, long before the birth of written history. A rise that should not have been possible so soon after near extinction. A rise that may still carry the fingerprints of forgotten ancestors. Those words take us into one of the most perplexing transitions in all of human history, a transition that archaeologists once believed was simple, slow, and predictable, but which new discoveries have turned into a riddle. Because after the Great Migrations, after the extinction of rival human species, after the long struggle against ice and famine, something extraordinary happened. Human culture advanced with impossible speed. It is as if, once the world stabilized, once Homo sapiens stood alone, deep memories awakened. Memories of knowledge, organization, engineering, and ritual that seemed far too advanced for a species still living in small nomadic bands. And soon, in scattered pockets across the planet, we begin to see the first sparks of something monumental, the earliest organized cultures. But these cultures appear too early, much too early, and they appear with a level of sophistication that seems out of place for hunter-gatherers emerging from a near-extinction event. To understand why this is such a problem for conventional archaeology, we must look at what the standard timeline predicts. According to the traditional model, humans should have spent tens of thousands of years as simple foragers after the disappearance of Neanderthals and Denisovans. Complex structures, large-scale cooperation, and organized spiritual belief should not emerge until the Neolithic era, around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, with the rise of agriculture. But the evidence does not cooperate, because scattered across Africa, Europe, Asia, and even Australia, we find sites from 50,000, 40,000, and 30,000 years ago that show behaviors far beyond what should have been possible. Start with Australia. Within a few thousand years of arriving on the continent, humans created rock art panels that rival some of the oldest symbolic expressions on Earth. They developed advanced fishing technologies, built shelters, and adapted to incredibly diverse environments: deserts, jungles, temperate coasts. The sophistication of these early Australians raises a question: how did these capabilities emerge so quickly? Then consider Europe. The Upper Paleolithic cultures, Aurignacian, Gravettian, Solutrean, Magdalenian, appeared with structured toolkits, artistic traditions, and long-distance trade networks that defy the simplicity expected of early humans. They created elaborate ivory figurines, ceremonial burials, and musical instruments. They carved lions, mammoths, and human forms with astonishing skill. And they painted deep inside caves that required lighting, planning, scaffolding, and knowledge of pigments. How did such cultural complexity emerge so soon after the bottleneck? But perhaps the most disturbing anomalies come from Africa, the birthplace of humanity. In regions such as Blombos Cave and Sibidu, archaeological layers reveal advanced behaviors stretching back 70,000 to 100,000 years. Yet in the millennia following, many of these behaviors disappear from the record. Then, after the migrations, they reappear again, almost as if cultural memory resurfaced after being lost during cycles of catastrophe. Is this coincidence or a sign of something deeper? The real shock, however, comes not from stone tools or pigments, but from structures, true structures, architecture, construction requiring planning, cooperation, and social organization, structures that should not exist at their age. One example lies in Siberia, where humans built rings out of hundreds of mammoth bones around 20,000 years ago. These rings were not random piles. They were engineered spaces, possibly shelters, possibly ceremonial sites. They required knowledge of materials, group coordination, and a vision of something larger than immediate survival. Another example lies in Jordan, where circular stone structures dated to 20,000 years ago may represent some of the earliest communal buildings. These structures predate agriculture by thousands of years. They raise a question few want to ask. Why were hunter-gatherers building architecture? But nothing compares to what was found in southeastern Turkey. Göbekli Tepe, a site so revolutionary that it forced archaeologists to rewrite entire chapters of prehistory. Massive stone pillars arranged in circles, carvings of animals and abstract shapes, T-shaped monoliths weighing tons, all built by hunter-gatherers over 11,000 years ago, thousands of years before agriculture, pottery, or permanent settlement. Göbekli Tepe should not exist. Its builders should not have had the organization, the engineering skills, or the social structure to create such a place. Yet they did. They carved, erected, aligned, and maintained structures that would challenge even later Bronze Age societies. Why? Because something survived the lost epoch. A memory, a story, a tradition, a blueprint carried forward from an older world, a world erased by catastrophe. Göbekli Tepe is not an isolated anomaly. Sites like Karahan Tepe, Nevalachori, and other early pre-pottery Neolithic settlements show similar patterns: advanced symbolism, monumental construction, complex rituals, all emerging too early, all emerging with suspiciously rapid sophistication. It is as if humanity did not start from zero after the Ice Age. It started from something inherited, something remembered. But if memories of an older world survived, they did so in fragments, encoded in rituals, myths, symbols, and stories passed across tens of thousands of years. This may explain why so many cultures, across so many continents, share strikingly similar myths about ancient ages of fire, ice, floods, cycles, and rebirth. These stories may not describe literal events as we imagine them, but they may carry echoes of real catastrophes and real civilizations that existed in the deep human past. Civilizations far older than our textbooks admit. Not cities, not empires, but organized cultures, lost cultures, built by humans or human-like species who lived before the bottleneck, before the migrations, before the Great Winter. If this is true, then the rise of early monuments after the Ice Age is not mysterious. It is the resurfacing of knowledge buried, but not entirely erased. Yet Göbekli Tepe and its sister sites pose a deeper question. If humans were capable of monumental architecture 11,000 or 12,000 years ago, how much earlier might such capabilities have appeared? And how much of that earlier record has been lost to rising seas, shifting deserts, and time? The end of the Ice Age brought massive floods, drowning coastlines where early settlements likely existed. It destroyed evidence. It erased entire landscapes. And so the oldest structures we find today may not be the first structures humans ever built, only the ones that survived. The true origins of human culture may lie underwater, buried beneath centuries of sediment, waiting for discovery. And as we approach the final chapters of this investigation, one truth becomes unavoidable. We are not the beginning of our story. We are the continuation of something older, deeper, and more mysterious. Because what comes next reveals the final and most haunting question of the lost epoch, a question written in myth, memory, and the human soul itself. Those words carry us beyond archaeology, beyond genetics, beyond the material fragments of the past. They lead us into a territory where science, myth, and human memory blur together. A territory where the oldest stories on Earth whisper clues about eras long forgotten, eras erased from the archaeological record, but not from the collective consciousness of our species. To understand the lost human epoch, we must consider a possibility both radical and ancient, that humanity remembers, not through written records, not through monuments, but through story. Every culture on Earth, no matter how distant or isolated, holds myths about earlier ages. Ages of light, ages of darkness, ages of creation, ages of destruction. They speak of cycles, worlds built and destroyed, civilizations rising and falling, knowledge gained and lost. Why do these stories exist everywhere? Why do they align so closely, despite oceans, mountains, deserts, and tens of thousands of years separating the storytellers? Coincidence is possible, but patterns demand attention. Take the Sumerians, the earliest known civilization with writing. Their records describe a time before kingship was lowered from heaven, when beings called the Apkallu taught humanity the arts of civilization. These beings lived before a great flood that swept over the world, a flood that erased everything, leaving only fragments. Move east to India. Ancient texts speak of multiple ages, the Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, each characterized by different levels of human virtue, knowledge, and lifespans. Between these ages lie catastrophes, fires, floods, cosmic resets, travel to Greece. Hesiod described 5 ages of mankind: the Golden Age, Silver Age, Bronze Age, Heroic Age, and Iron Age. Each age ends with disaster or transformation. Each age is separated by resets. In Mesoamerica, the Maya, Aztecs, and Toltec civilizations all spoke of earlier suns, worlds that rose and fell in succession. They believed we live in the 5th sun, after the destruction of 4 previous human epochs. In Australia, Aboriginal Dreamtime stories recall a primordial age in which ancestral beings shaped the world, a time before the land was transformed by fire and water. In Africa, the Dogon people speak of earlier human-like beings connected to the stars and great cycles of creation interrupted by destruction. In the Pacific Islands, Polynesian myths describe great migrations following the sinking of ancestral homelands, memories of rising seas at the end of the Ice Age. And in virtually every culture, the oldest stories describe a great flood, not a local flood, a world resetting flood. Why? Because at the end of the last ice age, between 14,000 and 8,000 years ago, sea levels rose more than 400 feet, drowning land masses, coastlines, and entire ecosystems. If early settlements, early cultures, or early knowledge centers existed along those coasts, the ocean erased them. Yet the memory of destruction survived. But myth goes further. It speaks not just of disaster, but of the people before us. This is where the lost epic forces us to consider a profound possibility. Humanity may carry cultural memories far older than archaeology can confirm. Memories inherited from ancestors who lived before the bottleneck, before the migrations, before the winter. Memories from the 200,000-year gap. How could such memories survive? Through ritual, through oral tradition, through symbolism, through storytelling passed from parent to child across thousands of generations. Stories mutate, but their bones remain. Consider the astonishing fact that Aboriginal Australian songlines, oral maps encoded in music, may preserve geographical features that existed before rising seas flooded ancient coastlines. If this is true, then human memory can survive tens of thousands of years. If songlines survived 30,000 years, what might myths preserve from 200,000? This brings us to the most haunting possibility of all. Some myths may not describe fictional events, but memories of earlier cultures erased by catastrophes during the lost epoch. Not advanced civilizations with metal and writing, but organized, intelligent cultures. Cultures with traditions, rituals, early engineering, and knowledge of the natural world. Cultures wiped out by volcanic winters, glacial surges, droughts, or rising seas. Cultures whose descendants, survivors, carried forward fragments of memory, fragments that later evolved into myths of golden ages and forgotten peoples, fragments that reappeared in Göbekli Tepe, fragments that resurfaced in early art and architecture, fragments encoded in symbols found across continents. But the most intriguing element of ancient myth is not destruction, it is instruction. In many traditions, the beings who lived before the world reset are described as teachers, bearers of knowledge, guardians of memory. The Apkallu of Sumer taught humans agriculture, building, law, and measurement. The sages of India taught astronomy and mathematics in ages long before the present. The culture heroes of the Americas brought fire, tools, agriculture, and ritual. The civilizing gods of Egypt arrived after a primordial catastrophe and restored order. The ancestral beings of Australia shaped the land and taught survival. Are these gods, spirits, metaphors, or are they symbolic memories of earlier humans or human-like species who survived disasters and passed down the knowledge they could? This idea is not new. Early anthropologists called such figures primordial teachers. Geneticists recognized the existence of multiple human species that coexisted with and contributed to modern humans. Archaeologists find evidence of advanced behavior far earlier than expected. Put these pieces together, and a picture forms. The lost epoch was not empty. It was populated. It was intelligent. It was diverse. It produced cultures whose memories echo through every myth on Earth. But memory is not the only clue. There is something else, something even more mysterious. Across continents, the earliest symbolic structures and artwork share patterns: concentric circles, serpent forms, hand stencils, geometric grids, sun-like motifs, spirals, and animal-human hybrids. How is this possible? How did groups separated by thousands of miles produce symbols so similar? Were these images independently invented? Were they innate expressions of the human mind? Or were they inherited from a shared ancestor culture, a culture that existed during the lost epoch but left no stone monuments, only symbols carried forward in memory? This is the crossroads where archaeology meets myth, where science meets story, where the echoes of the lost epoch whisper through time. But the most enigmatic memory of all, one found in nearly every ancient story, is the memory of a first humanity, a forgotten age before the age we know. Were these memories symbolic or literal? To answer that, we must journey deeper into the final chapters of our investigation, where the boundaries between evidence and possibility grow thin. Because what comes next confronts the most unsettling question of all. Who were the first humans? Not Homo sapiens, not anatomically modern humans, but the humans of the lost epoch. That question echoes like a tremor through everything we have explored, through fossils, tools, migrations, myths, and the long shadow of the lost epoch. It forces us to confront the possibility that our species, Homo sapiens, is not the beginning of the human story, but the end of a long, branching, tangled lineage that stretches back far deeper than textbooks suggest. A lineage filled with other humans, real humans, who lived, loved, built, dreamed, and vanished long before us. Humans who were not us, but who shaped us. To investigate these forgotten people, we must first set aside the tidy diagram of evolution we learned in school, the one where ape-like ancestors gradually climb upward until they become modern humans. That linear model is comforting, but it is a fiction. The real story is a forest of branches, each representing a species of human, each experimenting with intelligence, tools, culture, and survival in its own way. And during the 200,000-year gap, the lost epoch, many of these human species coexisted. Some thrived, Some vanished. Some became part of us. We begin with the most familiar, the Neanderthals. Once dismissed as brutish cavemen, Neanderthals were anything but. They crafted complex tools, controlled fire, hunted in organized groups, buried their dead, and may have created symbolic art. They cared for their sick and elderly. Their brains were slightly larger than ours. Their bodies were powerful, adapted for extremely harsh climates. In many ways, they were better at surviving Ice Age Europe than we were. So why did they disappear? Competition? Climate change? Interbreeding? Or something else entirely? Neanderthals survived multiple disasters before finally fading away around 40,000 years ago. Their extinction is one of the great mysteries of the lost epoch, a mystery we will return to. But Neanderthals were not the first, and they were not the most mysterious. Next, we turn to the Denisovans, a species identified not through bones, but through DNA extracted from a tiny fragment of finger bone found in a cave in Siberia. That bone changed everything. It revealed a human species genetically distinct from both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, a species that interbred with both, a species whose genetic legacy stretches today through East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific. But who were they? We have only a handful of their bones. We do not know what they look like. We do not know how they lived. We do not know why they disappeared. Yet they left behind tantalizing clues. Genes for high-altitude survival in Tibet. Genes linked to immune function. Genes that appear nowhere else. Some researchers propose that Denisovans were widespread, stretching from Siberia to Indonesia. If true, they may have contributed to early technological and cultural innovations in Asia. But Denisovans were not the only shadow humans. Genetic evidence hints at least 2 other hominin species in Africa, unidentified, unnamed, unknown. These ghost lineages contributed to the DNA of modern populations, yet left no physical fossils. Who were they? Where did they live? Why did they leave no trace? Or did their traces simply remain undiscovered, buried under jungles, deserts, or the ocean floor? The further we search, the stranger the story becomes, because some of the first humans may not have looked like us at all. Take Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of Indonesia, tiny humans with brain sizes far smaller than ours, yet capable of tool use, fire control, cooperative hunting, and possibly symbolic behavior. They existed until 50,000 years ago, long after the emergence of Homo sapiens. How did such a small-bodied, small-brained species survive for so long alongside much larger humans? Then there is Homo luzonensis, discovered in the Philippines, a species with a mix of primitive and advanced traits. They lived around the same time as Homo floresiensis. Did they interact? Did they share knowledge? Or did they develop their own cultures in isolation? But the most haunting species of all is the one we barely discuss, Homo heidelbergensis. This was a powerful, intelligent hominin that lived more than 600,000 years ago. Many researchers believe Homo heidelbergensis gave rise to Neanderthals, Denisovans, and perhaps even Homo sapiens. They hunted big game, built shelters, and may have used wooden spears thousands of years before previously believed. Some believe they were the first humans capable of organized culture. If so, then the true roots of human behavior, cooperation, communication, planning, may go back far deeper than the archaeological record suggests. But the deeper we go, the stranger the trail becomes. Because before Homo heidelbergensis, before Neanderthals, before Denisovans, before Homo sapiens, there were other humans, species that walked upright, used tools, shaped stones, controlled fire, and perhaps even created art. Homo erectus, for example, lived for nearly 2 million years, longer than any other human species. They migrated across Africa and Eurasia. They used fire, built shelters, and passed down knowledge from generation to generation. They may have been the first humans to truly understand the world, to see patterns, to anticipate seasons, to adapt to new landscapes, and yet they vanished. Why? Climate, competition, disaster, absorption into later species? Or did their worlds simply crumble during one of the many resets of the lost epoch? The more species we uncover, the more the question sharpens. What does it mean to be human? For hundreds of thousands of years, multiple answers existed simultaneously. Different humans, different minds, different ways of solving problems, different ways of understanding reality. So what made Homo sapiens the survivors? One theory suggests flexibility, another suggests communication, another suggests creativity. But a deeper possibility exists, a possibility grounded in the evidence from the lost epoch. Homo sapiens may not be a single species. We may be the descendants of multiple lineages, a merging of human worlds. If Neanderthals, Denisovans, ghost species, and early Homo sapiens interbred repeatedly across tens of thousands of years, then modern humans are not pure. We are composite. We are hybrid. We are the final branch formed from many. This raises an astounding possibility. The spark that transformed our cognition, the spark that allowed art, architecture, myth, and memory, may have emerged not from a single mutation, but from the merging of minds, genes, and cultures from multiple human species. The first humans were not us, but they live within us. Their DNA shaped our bodies. Their inventions shaped our tools. Their memories shaped our myths. Their extinctions shaped our fears. Their resilience shaped our survival. And so, as we return from the depths of prehistory, dragging these forgotten ancestors back into the light, one question begins to dominate everything. If so many human species existed, and if most vanished, then what exactly caused their disappearance? Was it climate, competition, catastrophe, or something else? Because the next chapter reveals the most unsettling possibility of the lost epoch, the possibility that humans did not just survive extinction cycles. We may have caused them. Those words fall like a shadow across everything we have uncovered so far. They force us to look not just at the mysteries of the lost epoch, but at ourselves. Because as unsettling as it is to imagine ancient catastrophes, vanished cultures, and forgotten species, there is a darker possibility, one that suggests that extinction did not simply happen to humanity. Humanity may have participated in it. To explore this, we must examine the disappearance of other human species with uncompromising honesty. For decades, the popular explanation for Neanderthal and Denisovan extinction was simple. They failed to compete. Homo sapiens was smarter, more adaptable, better equipped for survival. But the evidence does not support this comforting story. Neanderthals were brilliant hunters. Denisovans were genetically adapted to extreme environments. Both species survived for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than Homo sapiens has survived so far. So why did they vanish precisely when Homo sapiens expanded into their territories? Why did Homo floresiensis disappear shortly after modern humans arrived in Southeast Asia? Why did Homo luzonensis vanish around the time humans reached the Philippines? Why did multiple African hominin species leave no trace after Homo sapiens' dominance intensified? Coincidence? Climate? Competition? Or conflict? The archaeological record offers painful hints. Burn layers, cut marks on bones, caves taken over by incoming populations, sudden replacements in tool industries, rapid shifts in genetic signatures. Nothing indicates organized warfare, not in the modern sense, but contact between species likely involved everything from peaceful coexistence to competition, intimidation, and occasionally violence. In a world where survival was hard-won, territorial disputes could mean extinction for smaller, isolated groups. And yet, conflict explains only part of the story. The deeper truth lies in something far more subtle and far more powerful: culture. Homo sapiens did not simply replace other species because we were physically superior. We replaced them because we were culturally explosive. We had language with nuance. We had symbolic communication. We had myth, identity, ritual, and memory that could bind large groups together. And that made us unstoppable. Neanderthals lived in smaller groups. Denisovans likely lived in scattered pockets. Other species may have had limited communication range or cognitive flexibility. When Homo sapiens arrived with rapidly evolving cultures, cooperative networks, and the ability to adapt to new environments with speed, we did not merely outcompete other species biologically, we outcompeted them socially. This begins with something as simple as population size. When two species occupy the same environment, the species with greater group cohesion tends to win. Homo sapiens formed alliances. We planned hunts involving dozens. We shared information across far distances. We created symbols, songs, and rituals that strengthened identity. Other species may have been brilliant, but they did not build networks the way we did, and networks change everything. But even this social advantage is only a piece of the puzzle. To understand why other humans disappeared, we must also consider the environmental context. As Homo sapiens expanded across Eurasia, the world was undergoing dramatic climatic swings. The most significant was the approach of the last glacial maximum, the coldest phase of the Ice Age. Neanderthals were well adapted to cold climates, but even they struggled with the rapid oscillations between warm and cold intervals. Florianism adapted well to island environments, but could not withstand changes in habitat. Denisovans may have been specialized for mountainous terrain or forested regions, vulnerable to subtle ecological disruptions. In these stressful periods, even a small competitive disadvantage could mean extinction. But here is where the story grows darker, because as Homo sapiens expanded, large mammals, megafauna, began to vanish from every continent we touched. Woolly mammoths, giant ground sloths, European cave lions, saber-toothed cats, giant kangaroos, short-faced bears, territorial rhinoceroses, elephant birds, moas, diprotodons. The patterns are unmistakable. Wherever humans arrived, extinctions followed. Not instantly, not always directly, but inevitably. Some scientists argue this was due to habitat pressure, predation, and climate change acting together. Others believe humans hunted these animals to extinction. In reality, it was likely both, a combination of human expansion and environmental stress. But if humans could contribute to the extinction of megafauna, could we not also have contributed to the extinction of other human species? This does not mean violent extermination. In fact, evidence of large-scale conflict is rare. Instead, extinction may have come from subtler forces, competition for the same prey, competition for shelter in harsh climates, competition for water sources, competition for safe migration routes. A species with larger group coordination will almost always force smaller specialized species into marginal lands. Once isolated, those species face genetic decline, small population, reduced diversity, low resilience. One bad season, and they vanish. This pattern fits Neanderthals, it fits Denisovans, it fits Homo floresiensis, it fits ghost species in Africa. But the deepest question remains, did Homo sapiens know what they were doing? Did we recognize other humans as rivals, as not us? Or did we see them as similar, kin-like, perhaps even part of our world? Evidence of interbreeding suggests that the line between us and them was never clear. Humans of different species interacted intimately, socially, genetically, culturally. But interbreeding may also have accelerated extinction. When a small population mixes with a larger one, its genetic identity can be absorbed. It does not vanish violently, it dissolves. Extinction through assimilation. This may have happened to both Neanderthals and Denisovans. Perhaps they did not disappear. Perhaps they became part of us, so thoroughly that nothing distinct remained. But even this explanation does not fully address the strange timing of these extinctions, the uncanny alignment between human expansion and the disappearance of species that had survived for hundreds of thousands of years before we arrived. It is as if Homo sapiens carried something with us that affected other humans, something more than tools, more than language, more than numbers. Perhaps the spark itself, the cognitive revolution, created an imbalance between species. Perhaps we represented a level of unpredictability no ecosystem could absorb. Or perhaps we carried pathogens to which others had no immunity. Disease is an invisible predator, and it may have played a devastating role in the lost epoch. A virus, a parasite, or a bacterial infection could wipe out isolated bands of Neanderthals or Denisovans with terrifying efficiency. Yet we will never find bones with viral fingerprints after tens of thousands of years. We will never extract ancient diseases from most fossils. The traces are gone. What remains is the result. We survived. They didn't. And so the lost epoch ends with an unsettling truth. Homo sapiens is not just a species of survivors. We are a species of competitors, a species of adapters, a species of erasers. Intentionally or not, our rise is inseparable from the fall of others, which leads us to the most profound question of all, a question we have avoided until now, but one that the evidence, the myths, and the silences of the lost epoch force us to confront. If we erase the humans who came before us, what exactly did we inherit from them? And what, in turn, did we lose? Those questions stand at the threshold between science and memory, between the physical and the intangible, between what we know and what we sense but cannot fully prove. They force us to look at the lost epoch not merely as a gap in fossils, but as a missing chapter in our identity. To answer them, we must examine two things: the physical inheritance written in our DNA and the cultural inheritance preserved through story, symbol, and subconscious pattern. Because whether we acknowledge it or not, we are not entirely Homo sapiens. We are the descendants of many human worlds. Our DNA carries fragments of species that no longer exist, echoes of minds that understood the Earth in ways alien and ancient. And while we have inherited their strengths, their adaptations, their genetic gifts, we have also lost entire ways of seeing the world. First, the gifts. Start with Neanderthals. From them, we inherited aspects of our immune system, allowing us to resist pathogens that may have devastated early Homo sapiens. Neanderthal DNA influences our hair, skin, sleep cycles, metabolic functions, and even responses to altitude and temperature. In Europe and Asia, their legacy flows through millions of people. But Neanderthals were more than genes. They were a worldview, a species shaped by ice, by darkness, by extremes. They understood cold landscapes intimately. They hunted enormous game with precision. They mastered fire inside deep limestone caves. Their social structures may have been tight-knit, family-centered, deeply cooperative. In losing them, we lost not only their biology, we lost their perspective. Next, consider the Denisovans. Their genetic gifts are even more mysterious. In the Himalayas, one Denisovan gene helps modern humans thrive at altitudes where oxygen is thin. Other Denisovan genes may shape our perception of certain smells, our resistance to specific diseases, and our responses to sunlight. They carry whispers of ancient environments, mountains, forests, cold plateaus, but the cultural influence of Denisovans is unknowable. We do not have their tools, their art, or their structures. We have only fragments of their DNA, like embers from a fire we never saw. Yet their influence reaches deep into Oceania, into indigenous Australian communities, into Southeast Asia. They shaped populations that migrated across the Pacific long before written history. Their disappearance was not just a loss of diversity, it was a loss of knowledge. Then there are the ghost species, unknown, unnamed, unrecovered. Their DNA threads through Africa, hidden within lineages that survived the deepest bottlenecks. These ghost ancestors may have contributed cognitive or physiological traits that allowed Homo sapiens to endure droughts, survive deserts, navigate dense forests, or withstand climatic oscillations. But if these species had symbolic traditions, music, belief, story, they are gone. Their rituals evaporated, their languages vanished without echo. The memories that once lived in their minds exist now only as faint traces in genomes. And what of the hobbits, the diminutive Homo floresiensis, with brains the size of oranges, yet abilities that challenge every assumption about intelligence? Their survival on the island of Flores for hundreds of thousands of years suggests deep ecological knowledge, subtle patterns of adaptation we can barely comprehend. Their loss is a loss of an entire way of thinking, a reminder that intelligence comes in many forms, not only in large brains, but these are the physical inheritances, the genetic gifts. What about the other inheritance? The one that does not show up in DNA? The one that hides in symbols, myths, and instincts? Throughout the world, ancient stories describe beings who came before us. Some were giants, some were small, some were wise, some were wild, some taught humans, others opposed them, some lived in darkness, in forests, in mountains, in caves. Others lived in forgotten lands now beneath the sea. These stories are not historical records, but they may be memories, distorted, magnified, mythologized memories of real encounters between Homo sapiens and other human species during the lost epoch. Consider the common global motifs: the first people who taught survival skills, the ancestors of the deep caves, the mountain people who kept to themselves, the shadow humans who fled when the new humans arrived, the little forest people found in Asian and Pacific mythologies, the giant tribes spoken of by Native Americans, ancient Greeks, and Polynesians, the beings who came before the flood. These motifs appear in cultures separated by continents and oceans. Coincidence, parallel invention, or cultural memory echoing across 50,000+ years? Anthropologists hesitate to speculate. Mythologists lean closer. Geneticists remain cautious. But storytellers, the oldest record keepers, see patterns, and those patterns suggest a truth both awe-inspiring and tragic. Humanity once lived in a world of many humans. We walked alongside cousins, rivals, neighbors, teachers, and strangers. We shared land, tools, ideas. We competed. We mixed. We fought. We learned. We extinguished. And we inherited. But inheritance always comes with loss. We gained flexibility, adaptability, cooperation, and creativity from the merging of lineages. We gained cognitive diversity compressed into a single species. We gained survival traits forged across multiple worlds. But we lost Neanderthal endurance, Denisovan resilience, ghost species instinct, Erectus longevity, Floresiensis subtlety, Luzonensis adaptability. Most of all, we lost the diversity of minds. A planet once full of different human perspectives became a planet with one species, one cognitive model, one surviving branch. And while Homo sapiens became brilliant, innovative, visionary, and world-shaping, we became these things alone. The lost epoch, then, is not simply a gap. It is a graveyard of human possibilities, a silence left behind after a chorus disappeared, a single voice rising where once there were many. And now that we understand what we inherited and what we lost, we must confront the next haunting question. If the ancient world was shared by many human species, why did Homo sapiens become the sole survivor? What pushed us from the brink of extinction to global dominance? Because the next chapter delves into the transformation that finalized our rise, a transformation not of biology, but of mind. A transformation not of biology, but of mind. Those words mark the true turning point in our species' ascent, the moment when Homo sapiens stepped out of the long shadow of the lost epoch and became something the world had never seen before. Not because our bones changed, not because our muscles strengthened, not because our tools became sharper or our shelters grew sturdier, but because something shifted behind our eyes, something intangible, something ancient yet newly awakened, something that other human species, as far as we can tell, never fully achieved. To uncover this transformation, we must understand the single most important evolutionary adaptation humanity ever developed, an adaptation more powerful than fire, more transformative than tool-making, and more decisive than any genetic mutation. We developed the ability to invent reality, to imagine things that did not exist yet, to believe in worlds unseen, to project meaning into symbols, rituals, and stories, to cooperate with strangers because of shared imagined truths, to bind groups together through common myth, identity, and purpose. This was the birth of what some scientists call cognitive fluidity, the blending of memory, creativity, logic, emotion, symbolism, and social intelligence into a single unified mind. Before this transformation, humans thought. After it, humans dreamed. And dreams reshaped the world. But when did this transformation happen? Why did it appear when it did? And why did it not appear in other human species who had comparable brain sizes and arguably similar intelligence? To answer this, we must revisit the pivotal period after the genetic bottleneck and during the rise of early Homo sapiens cultures, a time when our species was small, scattered, fragile, and traumatized by disaster. This was not a stable world. It was a crucible. And within that crucible, a new kind of mind emerged. Some researchers believe this shift came from genetic changes affecting neural connectivity, changes that allowed for more efficient communication between different regions of the brain. Others argue it was driven by social necessity, as humans increasingly relied on cooperation to survive extreme environments. Still others propose that the key was language, not simple communication, but structured, symbolic language capable of expressing abstract concepts, metaphors, and narratives. Language did not emerge overnight. It grew in complexity as human groups became more interconnected. But once language became fully symbolic, everything else followed. Because with language came myth, with myth came identity, with identity came cooperation, with cooperation came survival, and with survival came innovation. Neanderthals used tools, but Homo sapiens used instructions. Neanderthals hunted in groups, but Homo sapiens hunted with strategy. Neanderthals buried their dead, but Homo sapiens created ritual. Neanderthals understood their environment, but Homo sapiens interpreted it. This shift may sound subtle, but it was profound. Other species reacted to the world. Homo sapiens reimagined it, and from imagination came power. Consider the earliest known symbolic artifacts: beads, pigments, engravings. At first glance, they appear trivial: decorations, ornamentation, but they mark something revolutionary: humans projecting identity onto themselves. A bead is not a tool, it is a message. It is memory made physical. It is belonging carved into matter. From this moment forward, humans were no longer just biological, they were cultural. And culture is far more adaptive than genes. Culture can change in a generation. Genes take millennia. But there is something even deeper at play, something more mysterious, something we still struggle to fully explain. Around the time humans began spreading across the world, our ancestors started showing signs of what could be called cognitive layering, the ability to combine different types of thought into unified expressions. Art merged with ritual, tool-making merged with symbolism, memory merged with prophecy. This fusion gave birth to traditions. Traditions gave birth to identity. Identity gave birth to moral systems, taboos, and codes. Suddenly, Homo sapiens could maintain social cohesion in groups far larger than any other primate species. Most primates can cooperate in groups of about 50. Humans learned to cooperate in groups of hundreds, sometimes thousands, because we believed in shared imagined truths. This ability changed everything. But there is something even more astonishing. The earliest evidence of structured symbolic behavior does not appear in Eurasia. It appears in Africa, during or just before the lost epoch. This suggests that the foundations of the human mind were already forming long before the Great Migration, long before Neanderthals disappeared, long before our species dominated the globe. But if this transformation began early, why did it not immediately lead to civilization, cities, writing, agriculture, or monuments? Why did tens of thousands of years pass before humanity built its first megalithic structures? The answer lies in the scars left by catastrophe. The lost epoch was not a time of growth. It was a cycle of collapse. Knowledge gained in one generation could be erased by drought, famine, or disaster in the next. Inventive groups might prosper for a century only to scatter or die out. The human mind had awakened, but the world was too unstable for that awakening to flourish. Then, after the bottleneck, after the great migrations, after the last intense glacial fluctuations began to ease, something changed. The environment stabilized, not completely, but enough. Populations grew, slowly, then rapidly. Groups connected, forming trade networks and shared identities. Knowledge survived, passed from one generation to the next. And for the first time in human history, the spark had fuel. But to fully understand the rise of the human mind, the mind that turned the world, we must also examine what was lost in the process. Because as Homo sapiens' culture expanded, other human cultures contracted. As our imagination broadened, theirs vanished. As our networks grew, theirs collapsed. As our symbols multiplied, theirs faded into the dust. The rise of the Homo sapiens mind coincided with the erasure of other minds. Minds that might have seen the world differently, valued different things, dreamed different dreams. We inherited the earth not because we were destined to, but because we imagined a world where we could. And once we imagined it, we made it real. But this raises a final, haunting question, one we cannot avoid as we continue through the last chapters of this story. If the human mind evolved through catastrophe, competition, and the absorption of other human lineages, what does that say about the world we live in now? Because the transformation that elevated us may also be the transformation that endangers us. And the next chapter explores that paradox, how the very mind that gave rise to civilization also carries the seeds of destruction. The very mind that gave rise to civilization also carries the seeds of destruction. Those words hold the paradox at the center of our existence. They reveal the truth hidden beneath every triumph of human ingenuity, every monument, every invention, every myth. The mind that elevated us above every other species is also the mind that threatens everything we have built. To understand how this paradox emerged, we must return again to the lost epoch, to the crucible in which the human mind was forged. The mind of Homo sapiens is a product of catastrophe, scarcity, competition, cooperation, imagination, and fear. It evolved in an environment of unpredictability, of sudden climate shifts, lethal predators, rival species, and ecological collapse. It is no wonder, then, that the mind we inherited is both brilliant and dangerous, both visionary and anxious, both rational and mythic. This paradox shapes everything we do, because the same creativity that allowed us to imagine tools, shelters, and strategies also allowed us to imagine threats, hierarchies, and enemies. The same symbolic capacity that gave us art also gave us superstition. The same cooperative instinct that built communities also created tribes. The same curiosity that led us across continents also led us toward the unknown, with equal parts wonder and dread. Human intelligence is not a single trait. It is a constellation of competing impulses, a balance of light and shadow. But to understand how this paradox emerged, we must examine the specific cognitive traits forged during the lost epoch, traits that allowed Homo sapiens to outcompete other human species, survive climate collapse, and ultimately dominate the planet. These traits include 1. Hypersocial imagination, the ability to form large, cohesive groups through shared beliefs, myths, and symbolic identities. 2. Abstract foresight, the capacity to imagine futures, predict outcomes, and plan several steps ahead. 3. Cognitive flexibility, the talent for switching between different modes of thinking, from logic to creativity to empathy. 4. Risk perception, an enhanced sensitivity to danger, shaped by tens of thousands of years of survival under threat. 5. Narrative creation, the instinct to impose meaning on events, to weave stories that explain the unexplainable. 6. Problem solving through innovation, the ability to invent new solutions rather than rely solely on instinct or tradition. These traits were forged for survival, not for comfort, not for stability, and not for modern civilization. And that mismatch between ancient cognitive wiring and modern life is the source of humanity's greatest contradictions, because the human mind is not optimized for peace. It is optimized for adaptation. Consider the earliest humans emerging from the shadow of the bottleneck. They faced a world stripped of stability, a landscape shattered by volcanic winter and drought, filled with rival species competing for the same shrinking resources. The humans who survived were not necessarily the strongest or the fastest. They were the ones who could interpret danger, imagine solutions, form alliances, and adapt behavior swiftly. This adaptability was our greatest strength. But it also became our greatest liability, because a mind shaped by crisis reacts to imagined crises with the same intensity as real ones. A mind designed to track threats sees threats everywhere. A mind evolved to create symbolic identities also creates divisions. A mind built for cooperation within groups fosters competition between groups. The seeds of tribalism are ancient. The seeds of anxiety are ancient. The seeds of creation and destruction are ancient, and all were forged during the lost epoch. To understand how this paradox played out across history, consider the rise of early Homo sapiens societies. As soon as populations grew large enough to form tribes, clans, and networks, conflicts emerged. Not because humans were inherently violent, but because our landscapes were shaped by scarcity. Food was scarce, shelter was scarce, water was scarce, warmth was scarce. Scarcity shaped cognition. Scarcity shaped culture. Scarcity shaped myth. The human mind learned to value the group above the individual. It learned to defend territory. It learned to distrust outsiders. It learned to tell stories that reinforced loyalty, unity, and identity. These adaptations helped us survive, but they also made us dangerous. As populations expanded, small-scale groups collided. Conflicts erupted not because humans were evil, but because they were desperate, and desperation sharpened instincts. Every rival group was a potential threat. Every unknown band held resources that could mean survival. But as the Ice Age waned and the world stabilized, something unexpected happened. The human mind did not relax. It remained alert. It remained hungry. It remained wired for crises that no longer existed. And so the creative side of the mind, the side that invented tools, rituals, symbols, raced forward. Meanwhile, the defensive side, the side shaped by danger, evolved into something new. War, conquest, domination, fear of the foreign, fear of scarcity, even in abundance. This is the paradox of the human mind. We are creatures built to imagine infinite futures, but trapped by instincts shaped in a world of constant threat. We construct civilizations, but carry the psychology of survivors. We create beauty, but fear loss. We pursue progress, but dread the unknown. We form vast societies, yet still think in terms of tribes. This paradox becomes even clearer when we examine the birth of early civilizations. The societies that rose after the Ice Age ended, when the world finally became stable enough for large-scale cultural development. The first cities, in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China, were marvels of organization, but they were also built on hierarchy, walls, conflict, and strict social structures. These features were not inventions of civilization. They were echoes of the lost epoch, because when the first humans gathered in large communities, they carried their old instincts with them. They created rituals to bind people together. They created laws to control behavior. They created symbols to maintain identity. They created stories to explain the world. And they built defenses, real and imagined, against threats that resembled the ancient dangers of the Ice Age more than the realities of urban life. Civilization was not a clean break with the past. It was the amplification of ancient instincts, and that is why the human mind remains divided to this day. We are creatures of imagination and creatures of fear. We are cooperative and competitive. We are creators and destroyers. We are compassionate and territorial. We are peaceful and violent. We are dreamers and survivors. This duality is not a flaw, it is the legacy of the lost epoch. But understanding this paradox reveals something important. The qualities that once ensured our survival now shape every global decision, every cultural movement, every conflict, every technological invention. And this leads us to an even deeper question, one that connects our ancient past to our uncertain future. If the human mind was shaped by catastrophe, what happens when catastrophe returns? Because throughout the lost epoch, every major transformation in humanity, every leap in cognition, every migration, every cultural shift was triggered by collapse. What if the next collapse triggers the next transformation? Those words pull us into a truth that lies like a spine beneath all of human history. The truth that our species does not evolve in straight lines. We evolve in cycles, cycles of creation and destruction, cycles of darkness and dawn, cycles of collapse followed by renewal. The lost epoch was shaped by these cycles. The rise of Homo sapiens was shaped by these cycles. And perhaps, though we hesitate to admit it, our future may be shaped by them as well. To understand these ancient cycles, we must first understand that nearly every major development in human evolution occurred after a catastrophe, not before. The bottleneck that reduced our species to a few thousand individuals was followed by the spark of symbolic thought. The volcanic winters, climate oscillations, and ecological collapses of the lost epoch were followed by migrations that rewrote the world. The end of the Ice Age, with its floods, fires, and melting glaciers, was followed by the rise of the first monumental cultures. Is this coincidence or pattern? Humanity appears to grow in the spaces left by destruction, like new vegetation blossoming after a wildfire. The transformations that define us do not come during peace. They come in the aftermath. This suggests something profound. Human cognitive evolution is crisis-driven. When the world destabilizes, the human mind adapts, not slowly, but rapidly, explosively. Our greatest changes happen when we are pushed to the edge. This idea aligns with archaeological evidence, genetic studies, climate data, and mythological patterns across cultures. But what makes it truly astonishing is that this pattern continues long after the lost epoch ends and civilization begins. Consider early civilizations. Mesopotamia rose after repeated flooding of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, which forced humans to invent irrigation, planning, record-keeping, and centralized management. Egypt rose after the desertification of the Sahara, which drove scattered groups toward the Nile Valley. The Indus Valley civilization rose after major monsoon shifts. Chinese civilization crystallized around the Yellow River after cycles of devastating floods. Olmec culture in Mesoamerica emerged after volcanic disruptions. Every major civilization begins with a crisis, and every major collapse, from the Bronze Age collapse to the fall of the Roman Empire, the decline of the Maya, the end of Göbekli Tepe, leads to new forms of organization, new technologies, and new belief systems. Humanity does not simply survive chaos. Humanity becomes something new because of it. This echoes the structure of the lost epoch, an era defined by repeated destruction, followed by bursts of innovation among the survivors. But this pattern raises a deeper question. Why do humans transform through collapse? The answer lies in the unique architecture of the Homo sapiens mind. Our cognitive advantage is not raw intelligence. Neanderthals had comparable intelligence. Denisovans may have had specialized brilliance. Earlier species solved problems adapted to their environments. Our advantage is adaptive imagination, the ability to imagine alternative futures, especially when the present becomes impossible. Catastrophe forces imagination to activate. Survival demands innovation. The mind, under threat, becomes hyper-creative. In the lost epoch, this meant new tools, new strategies, new symbolic systems. In the era of early civilizations, it meant agriculture, calendars, writing, architecture. In the modern era, it means technological revolutions. But there is a cost. The same imagination that saves us also destabilizes us. It makes us restless, ambitious, driven to reshape environments faster than they can recover. It pushes us into cycles of growth that lead to new collapses. Thus, humanity is caught in a loop: crisis, innovation, expansion, overextension, collapse, renewal. This cycle is not unique to civilization. It is visible in the deep past, long before cities existed. During the lost epoch, small human groups repeatedly thrived when conditions were stable, then collapsed when glaciers advanced, when droughts intensified, when supervolcanoes erupted. Those who adapted, cognitively, socially, symbolically, survived. Those who could not vanished. We inherited the minds of the survivors, minds optimized for crisis, minds forged in scarcity. But now, humanity faces a paradox unlike any in the lost epoch. For the first time in our history, we have created a world too stable, too abundant, too interconnected for the ancient cycles to unfold in the same way. We have insulated ourselves from many natural catastrophes. We have subdued predators, controlled environments, distributed resources globally. Yet the mind adapted for survival still lives within us, restless and searching for threats. And so we create our own crises, conflicts, ideological divisions, environmental strain, technological risks, economic instability, identity fragmentation. The human mind evolved to adapt, but it never evolved to rest. And so the cycles of crisis-driven transformation continue into the present, only now they are self-generated. The same cognitive power that led to symbolic art and monumental architecture has led to global networks, artificial intelligence, nuclear technology, and climate-altering industry. These advances are extraordinary, but they come with consequences. Because if humanity evolves through collapse, then we must ask, what happens when we create a collapse large enough to challenge our own survival? This is where the lost epoch becomes more than ancient history. It becomes a mirror, showing us who we are and who we may become. When the last great bottleneck occurred, fewer than 5,000 humans may have survived, yet they carried the seed of us. If another collapse were to occur today, whether environmental, technological, political, or something else, would humanity experience another cognitive leap? Would a new kind of mind emerge? Would we enter another transformation phase? Would we adapt once more as we have countless times before? Or have we reached a level of complexity where collapse would no longer spark innovation, but annihilation? These are the questions the lost epoch forces upon us, not as predictions, but as reflections on who we are and how we have always changed. But before we look toward the future, we must complete our journey through the past. We must explore the final mystery of the lost epoch, the one that ties together fossils, myths, memories, and human consciousness. Because if cycles shape humanity, then the lost epoch may not simply be an era of ancient history. It may be a pattern repeating across all of human existence. That idea is the threshold between everything we've explored so far and the final, most profound understanding of the lost epoch. Because if the story of ancient humanity is not a linear path, not a climb, not a march, not a staircase, but a cycle, then the lost epoch is not simply a distant chapter buried beneath the weight of time. It is the blueprint, the original loop, the primordial rhythm underneath every rise and fall. And if this pattern has repeated again and again, across species, cultures, continents, and ages, then we must ask the forbidden question. Are we living inside the latest iteration of a cycle as old as the human mind itself? To understand this, we must examine the structure of the lost epoch from a higher vantage, not as scattered mysteries, but as a single, coherent pattern. This pattern has several distinct phases. 1. Stability, a period when environments calm, populations grow, and cultures develop. 2. Innovation, bursts of creativity triggered by necessity or opportunity. 3. Expansion, migrations, exploration, territorial spread. 4. Conflict, competition with rival groups or species. 5. Overextension, populations grow beyond what ecosystems can sustain. 6. Collapse, triggered by climate change, disaster, or internal strain. 7. Survival, small, adaptable groups endure. 8. Transformation, new cognitive and cultural traits emerge in the aftermath. Then, the cycle begins again. This pattern describes the rise and fall of Homo erectus populations. It describes Neanderthal cultural phases. It describes Denisovan expansions and fragmentations. It describes ghost lineages that flickered into existence and vanished. It describes the final rise of Homo sapiens, and it describes every major civilization. The lost epoch is not the exception, it is the rule. But what makes the lost epoch so haunting, so mysterious, is that its cycle is nearly invisible. The archaeological record is fractured, the genetic record is cryptic, the mythological record is symbolic, and the geological record is ambiguous. Yet when these pieces are layered together, the same arc emerges again and again. Let's reconstruct the pattern using what we now know. Phase 1. Stability, 300,000 to 250,000 years ago. Early Homo sapiens emerge alongside other human species. African environments offer niches for development. Behaviors begin diversifying. Cognitive foundations strengthen. Phase 2. Innovation. Symbolic markings in Blombos Cave. Pigments. Tools with composite structures. Early trade networks. Innovation pulses across Africa and the Middle East. Phase 3. Expansion. 200,000 to 120,000 years ago. Multiple waves of migration out of Africa. Early Homo sapiens spread into the Levant, possibly Europe. Interbreeding with Neanderthals begins. Populations rise. Phase 4. Conflict and competition. Territorial overlaps. Shared caves. Hybrid individuals. Cultural exchange mixed with competition. Rival species push against each other. Phase 5. Overextension. Climate becomes unstable. Populations disperse into marginal environments. Rival species stretch across landscapes with limited resources. Phase 6. Collapse. 80,000, 70,000 years ago. Volcanic winters. Droughts. Ice advances. Ecosystems crash. The bottleneck nearly obliterates Homo sapiens. Phase 7. Survival. A few thousand humans endure in refuges. Neanderthals and Denisovans retreat to isolated zones. Ghost species shrink further. Phase 8. Transformation. Symbolic thought blooms. Language becomes richer. Tools diversify. Complex identity emerges. Humans become behaviorally modern. Then, the cycle resets with the expansion around 60,000, 50,000 years ago, leading into the next arc that culminates in the end of the Ice Age and the rise of civilization. This pattern is so consistent that it almost resembles a biological rhythm. But here is where the mystery deepens, because the pattern does not belong only to Homo sapiens. It appears in every human species. Neanderthals had distinct cultural phases, stable periods followed by sudden advancements followed by collapses. Denisovan genetic patterns show expansions into new regions, followed by contractions, followed by hybrid zones. Even Homo erectus populations rise and fall in a cyclical pattern over 1.8 million years of existence. Why? Because humans are not passive participants in evolution. We are shaped by chaos, and we shape the world in return. The world destabilizes, forcing adaptation. Humans adapt, creating tools and strategies. Those strategies allow population growth. Population growth stresses ecosystems. Stress leads to conflict. Conflict, competition, or climate shifts lead to collapse. Survivors become something new. This is not randomness. This is a feedback loop. And if we accept that humanity evolves mentally and culturally through cycles of collapse, then the lost epoch becomes the most important period in our history because it was the longest and most formative iteration of the cycle. Everything that defines modern humanity, imagination, language, identity, cooperation, territorial instinct, symbolic thought, myth, spirituality, conflict, creativity, emerged through thousands of cycles inside the lost epoch. It was our crucible, our forge, our birth chamber. And now we must confront the possibility that the same structure underlies the mythic cycles spoken of in ancient traditions. The Sumerians described 5 ages of humanity, each ending in catastrophe. The Maya described 4 previous worlds destroyed before the current one. The Greeks described the fall from the Golden Age to the Iron Age. Ancient India describes yugas, cycles of ascent and decline. The Norse sagas speak of ages between Ragnarok events. Indigenous Australian Dreamtime includes cycles of creation and destruction. These stories echo one another because the pattern they describe is real. The lost epoch was not a single collapse. It was many. Civilization was not a singular rise. It was a continuation of countless forgotten rises. The pattern never ended. We simply entered a new phase. But there is a twist. Unlike earlier collapses where nature was the architect, modern humanity has become the architect of its own cycles. We drive ecological change. We shape climates. We create technologies that alter environments faster than natural processes. We generate conflicts that amplify instability. In short, we have become the catastrophic force, which leads us to a profound question. If humanity has entered a stage where we ourselves generate the next collapse, what will the next transformation look like? Who will the survivors be? What kind of mind will emerge from the next crucible? Because if the lost epoch taught us anything, it is this: collapse is not the end. Collapse is the hinge. Collapse is the doorway to the next version of humanity. But such a transformation is not inevitable. We are the first humans with the capacity to understand the cycle, and perhaps the first capable of breaking it. Yet to break the cycle, we must understand its final component, the element that ties together mind, myth, ancestry, catastrophe, and memory. Because the last puzzle of the lost epoch is not about what happened to ancient humans, it is about what remains inside us. Those words bring us to the deepest layer of this entire investigation, deeper than fossils, deeper than ancient DNA, deeper than myths and migrations and vanished species. They bring us to the echo that humanity carries within itself, the echo that survived the bottleneck, survived the winter, survived the collapse of countless worlds during the lost epoch, the echo that whispers in our instincts, our dreams, our fears, and our imaginations. To understand this echo, we must ask a question most scientific disciplines avoid. What does humanity remember? This is not memory in the literal sense, not conscious, not detailed, not historical. It is something older, submerged beneath rational thought, encoded not through language, but through instinct and emotion, a type of memory that nature itself preserves through behavior, bias, intuition, and pattern. We see it every day, but rarely recognize it for what it is. The echo inside us reveals itself most clearly in the moments when modern life falls away, in crisis, in fear, in love, in wonder, in ritual. Because in these moments, humans behave like ancient humans. A loud noise in the night triggers the same instant alertness that once warned our ancestors of predators or rival species. A shift in the wind or an approaching storm awakens the same instinctual calculations that determined survival during the lost epoch's extreme climates. A dark cave still evokes fascination and fear, as if some ancestral part of us remembers the deep, sacred places where early humans sheltered, painted, performed rituals, or hid from danger. Why do so many people experience awe in mountains, forests, deserts, and oceans? Because these landscapes shaped us. We spent 99.5% of our existence in them. Civilization is recent. The human brain is ancient. The echo guides us, and sometimes it haunts us. But the echo is not only fear and instinct. It is also creativity, spirituality, curiosity, and a longing for something lost. Consider humanity's obsession with origins, with creation myths, golden ages, forgotten civilizations, cataclysms, and rebirth. These themes appear independently across every continent, every culture, every era. Why? Because the lost epoch was an age of resets, because early humans lived through cycles of destruction and renewal, because bottlenecks were real, floods were real, fires were real, ice advances were real, because our ancestors did endure eras where worlds ended and began again. The echo of these experiences survives inside myth. This explains why flood myths appear universally, from Mesopotamia to China to the Americas to Oceania. Rising seas after the Ice Age drowned coastlines where early humans once lived. Entire hominin populations vanished as ice sheets retreated. Rivers shifted, lakes expanded or evaporated. Those who survived carried the memory in the form of stories. Similarly, myths of the first beings or the elder race may reflect encounters between Homo sapiens and other human species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, ghost lineages, long before modern humans became the sole survivors. Myths of giants, myths of small forest people, myths of mountain dwellers, myths of pale strangers, myths of dark-skinned ancestors of the caves, myths of teachers from earlier worlds, myths of chaos and order battling endlessly. These are not literal histories, but they may be emotional memories, the echo of encounters buried beneath millennia of retelling. The echo also appears in our dreams, the same archetypal images that appear in dreams across cultures, falling, running, being chased, losing one's way, encountering strange beings, surviving floods or fires, mirror the survival challenges of the lost epoch. We dream about the dangers that shaped us. The echo appears in children's fears long before they are conditioned by society. Fear of darkness, fear of separation, fear of predators, fear of strangers, fear of deep water, fear of heights. These are not modern fears. They are ancestral. But the echo is not limited to instinct and fear. It also shapes our highest expressions of culture. Music, for example, predates Homo sapiens' migration out of Africa. Mother-infant rhythms, group chants, ritual drumming, all emerged in the lost epoch. They were tools of cooperation, communication, and social cohesion. Today, they survive as art, celebration, worship, therapy. Storytelling, likewise, is far older than writing. Humans told stories around fires tens of thousands of years ago. Stories that explained the stars, mapped migration routes, taught survival strategies, and preserved collective memory. Today, those instincts survive in our need for narrative, in cinema, literature, conversation, religion, and identity. Symbolism, the most mysterious trait of the human mind, began as markings on stone, pigments smeared on cave walls, patterns etched into bone. These symbols were more than decoration. They were a language before language, a way to encode meaning, identity, and memory when spoken words were not enough. The echo also manifests in humanity's spiritual instincts. Across cultures, we see shared tendencies, belief in unseen forces, belief in ancestors guiding or watching, belief in realms beyond the physical, belief in cycles, birth, death, rebirth, belief in cosmic order and chaos. These beliefs may originate from the deep past, when early humans lived in a world where death was omnipresent, survival uncertain, and the natural world seemed animated with intention. Such environments shape cognition. They teach the mind to search for patterns, agents, and meanings everywhere. The echo of this mentality survives beneath modern thought. But perhaps the most astonishing expression of the echo is found in humanity's longing for lost knowledge. Why does the idea of a forgotten age, Atlantis, Lemuria, Zep-Tepi, Rapa Nui's earlier generations, the Golden Age, resonate across the world? Not because of literal accuracy, but because something deep within us remembers losing something. We remember worlds that collapsed. We remember ancestors who vanished. We remember tools and knowledge erased by catastrophe. We remember migrations across lands now submerged. We remember the presence of other humans who are no longer here. We remember a world bigger and more diverse than today. And on some level, we grieve it. This grief is not conscious. It is inherited. A species that was once one among many now stands alone, and the loneliness is ancient. The echo, then, is not simply memory. It is identity. It is a psychic inheritance forged in a world filled with danger, beauty, rivals, and mystery. And this brings us to the final implication of the echo. It may be the reason we seek meaning. Why do humans ask questions no other species asks? Who are we? Where do we come from? What is our purpose? What came before us? What comes after? Because we evolved in a world where understanding reality meant survival. Because interpreting patterns meant life or death. Because memory, even fragmented memory, was the difference between endurance and extinction. Meaning is not a luxury. Meaning is a survival strategy. And now, as we approach the end of this journey, the echo inside us reveals one last truth, the truth that ties together the lost epoch, the rise of Homo sapiens, and the cycles that shape the world. The echo is not simply a memory of what was, it is a signal of what will be. Because just as humanity has inherited the instincts, beliefs, and patterns of the lost epoch, we also inherit the capacity to transform again. But transformation demands a catalyst. Transformation demands crisis. Transformation demands the same conditions that shaped us before, which raises the ultimate question of the lost epoch, a question we can no longer avoid. Are we approaching another turning point, another reset, another transformation? And if so, will we survive it? Those questions linger at the edge of everything we have uncovered, as if the lost epoch has been pointing quietly, insistently toward our present moment. Because the story of humanity is not only a story of what came before, it is also a prophecy woven into our biology, our memory, and our mythology. To understand the lost epoch is to recognize the shape of patterns that have repeated for hundreds of thousands of years, patterns that brought us here, to this precarious moment in time. The lost epoch was marked by collapses of unimaginable scale. Ice sheets advanced, supervolcanoes erupted, rivers dried, coastlines vanished, entire species disappeared. Hominin populations shrank, merged, migrated, and died. Yet from that chaos emerged the modern human mind, adaptive, creative, symbolic, restless, visionary, afraid, astonishing. And now we stand on a new precipice, shaped not by glaciers or volcanoes, but by forces of our own making, forces that mirror the ancient catalysts that once transformed us. To understand whether we are approaching another great shift, we must recognize the parallels between the world of the lost epoch and the world of today. 1. Rapid environmental instability. During the lost epoch, climate oscillations reshaped landscapes within decades. These shifts demanded rapid adaptation and triggered migrations across continents. Today, we face environmental changes far more rapid, caused not by orbital cycles, but by human activity. Rising temperatures, shifting rainfall patterns, melting ice, and desertification echo the conditions that once forced ancient humans into crisis-driven evolution. 2. Population pressure. In the lost epoch, overextended populations created conflicts and collapses. Today, global populations stretch the planet's resources. Cities grow at unprecedented rates. Migration pressures increase. Competition for water, food, and arable land intensifies. 3. Technological disruption. Early humans experienced cognitive revolutions triggered by necessity. New tools, new strategies, new collaborations. Today's world is shaped by technological upheaval on a scale that rivals evolutionary shifts. Artificial intelligence, automation, genetic engineering, and global networks reshape society faster than culture can adapt. 4. Social fragmentation. The lost epoch saw isolated groups develop distinct cultures, identities, and survival strategies. Today, global connectivity paradoxically produces fragmentation, ideological tribes, information silos, and cultural tensions. The ancient pattern repeats in digital form. 5. Crisis as catalyst. Every major human transformation in the lost epoch followed disaster. In the modern world, crises, pandemics, economic instability, climate events accelerate innovation but also amplify division. 6. The return of ancient fears. Perhaps most telling, modern humans experience anxieties that resemble ancestral fears. Fear of scarcity, fear of strangers, fear of collapse, fear of the unknown. These are not modern inventions. They are evolutionary echoes resurfacing under pressure. When viewed through this lens, the present moment feels less like a unique era and more like the prelude to another great cycle, one that could reshape humanity once again. But this time, something is different. This time, we are not passive participants in the cycle. We are the drivers of it. For the first time, humans are the glacial force. Humans are the volcanic eruption. Humans are the climate shift. Humans are the architects of instability. Humans are the creators of the next bottleneck or the preventers of it. This is unprecedented, and it forces us to confront a question even more unsettling than whether a collapse is coming. If collapse is part of the pattern, is it necessary, or can we break the cycle? To answer this, we must understand what collapse meant in the past. In the lost epoch, collapse was not purely destructive. It was evolutionary. It forced adaptation. It pruned fragile lineages. It strengthened survivors. It produced the cognitive flexibility that defines Homo sapiens. But modern collapse would not mirror ancient collapse. The world is no longer a mosaic of isolated tribes. It is a single interconnected system. A collapse today would not prune. It could obliterate. Yet humanity's greatest strength has always been its adaptability. We survived supervolcanoes. We survived ice ages. We survived extinctions that eliminated 9 out of 10 human species. We survived the bottleneck that nearly ended our lineage. And we did more than survive. We learned. We adapted. We transformed. If the cycles of the lost epoch taught us anything, it is this. Transformation is not optional. It is inevitable. But the nature of transformation is not predetermined. Transformation can be destructive or creative, chaotic or intentional, blind or guided. The next great shift, if it is coming, may not be singular or catastrophic. It may be gradual, psychological, cultural, technological, or ecological. It may be a shift in how we think, how we collaborate, how we understand ourselves. In the lost epoch, transformation emerged unconsciously. Today, we have the ability to shape it consciously, but only if we learn from the patterns that created us. These patterns reveal 3 core truths. Truth 1. Humanity grows most when it is pushed to the edge. Truth 2. The human mind is capable of reinvention far beyond what we imagine. Truth 3. The greatest danger is not collapse, but failing to transform in time. We teeter at the threshold of a new cycle, not because the earth demands it, but because we do. The same instincts that saved our ancestors now collide with a world too complex for ancient patterns. The same imagination that built civilization now threatens its foundations. The same adaptability that shaped our evolution now waits for the next test. And so we must ask, will the coming shift elevate us again, as past shifts elevated the survivors of the lost epoch? Or will it reveal that our adaptability, once our greatest strength, has reached its limit? The answer lies in the final lesson of the lost epoch, a lesson not about the past, but about the story we choose to write next. Because the final chapter is not about extinction, collapse, or catastrophe. It is about responsibility. identity, memory, and the possibility that humanity is capable of breaking a cycle older than itself. Those words guide us into the last and most important revelation of our entire journey. The lost human epoch is not simply a forgotten era buried beneath ancient soil. It is not merely a scientific puzzle, a genetic riddle, or a mythological echo. It is a mirror, a reflection of who we were, who we are, and who we may yet become. To look at the lost epoch is to look at the crucible that formed us, a world of fire and ice, a world of rivals and kin, a world of collapse and renewal, a world of forgotten civilizations and vanished species, a world where the human mind was reshaped again and again until it became what it is today, powerful, imaginative, fragile, ambitious, afraid, astonishing. But this final chapter asks something more, something deeper, something we rarely dare to ask. What does it mean to be the last human species? For nearly all of our existence, we shared the world with others. Neanderthals with their quiet strength, Denisovans with their alpine resilience, ghost lineages we will never fully know, Homo erectus, the traveler, Homo floresiensis, the survivor, Homo luzonensis, the mystery. We were never alone. We were one among many, but now we are alone. And that loneliness is not normal. It is unprecedented. It is recent. It is the result of cycles that eliminated every other human species. And with that loneliness comes a responsibility no other species ever carried. Because we are not simply the survivors. We are the inheritors of all humanity. We carry every branch of the family tree inside us. We are the final chapter of a book written across continents and ages. This is why the lost epoch matters, not because of what happened, but because of what it means. It means that our identity is older, deeper, and more diverse than we ever imagined. It means that our mind, our greatest tool, was forged in catastrophe. It means our creativity is ancient. Our fears are ancient. Our instincts are ancient. Our symbols are ancient. Our myths are ancient. Our longing for connection, meaning, and memory is ancient. It means that humanity is not fragile. Humanity is resilient beyond measure. But it also means this: the patterns that shaped us can destroy us if we repeat them blindly. The lost epoch shows us a world transformed again and again by collapse, but also a world where collapse produced renewal, a world where small groups survived the impossible and built new ways of thinking, a world where adversity refined imagination and cooperation into the tools that made us who we are. Yet modern humanity stands at a crossroads where collapse could mean something different. Our world is too interconnected. Our systems are too vast. Our technologies are too powerful. Our influence on the planet is too absolute. A collapse today would not prune the tree. It could burn the forest. But here lies the paradox, the same paradox that has defined humanity from the beginning. The mind that creates the threat is the mind that can create the solution. We are not prisoners of the ancient cycle. We are the first species capable of understanding it. And understanding gives us power. Power to shape, not react. Power to foresee, not merely survive. Power to choose, not simply endure. This is the true legacy of the lost epoch. It teaches us that transformation is not something that happens to us. It is something we create. So what transformation will define the next chapter of humanity? Will it be technological, a merging of human and machine that alters cognition forever? Will it be ecological, a new relationship with the planet that avoids the mistakes of the past? Will it be social, a global identity that transcends the ancient tribal instincts encoded during the lost epoch? Will it be spiritual, a rediscovery of meaning that unites story, memory, and science? Or will it be something entirely new, something we cannot yet imagine? The answer depends on whether we accept what the lost epoch reveals, that humanity is not a finished story. It is an unfolding one, and we are still writing it. The lost epoch shows us that humanity is defined not by perfection, but by transformation, not by stability, but by resilience, not by certainty, but by possibility. It shows us that identity is not fixed. It is inherited from 1,000 ancestors who faced 1,000 catastrophes and adapted in 1,000 ways. It shows us that memory is not just written in books, it is written in our minds, our stories, our myths, our instincts, our dreams. It shows us that the human journey is far older and stranger than the few thousand years we call history. And it shows us that the next chapter, the one unfolding now, is not predetermined. We are still the same species forged in the lost epoch. We still carry the echo of ancient worlds. We still feel the pull of cycles that shaped our evolution. But we are also the first species capable of choosing a new path. The final truth of the lost epoch is this: humanity is not defined by the catastrophes we survived, but by the worlds we build after them. And now, for the first time, we can build a world before the next catastrophe arrives. The story of the lost human epoch ends here, not with extinction, not with collapse, but with the recognition that the future is ours to create. The next cycle has not begun. The next transformation has not been written. The next chapter is blank, and humanity holds the pen.